Hi, everyone. Good evening on this glorious Perth autumn. Well, I hope you're in Perth. Well, actually, I hope you're from all over the world and you want to learn about biodiversity and how you can transform your urban spaces on this glorious autumn day. This is our second magnificent event that we're running with the City of South Perth. Biodiversity in the suburbs, yes, we can. And I love being able to inspire people to be able to create biodiversity in their own landscapes. There's so many reasons now why we need biodiversity in our landscapes now more than ever. And I'll talk a little bit more about that today. But firstly, I would like to just ask you if everyone can hear us okay. We're having a few technical issues with the great spread of pieces of equipment I can see behind me here. So just let us know, you know how to do it. If there is anything coming through, I'm getting lots of thumbs up. Beautiful. Okay, so yeah, is it clear? Just let us know if it's coming out clear, that you can hear my dulcet tones. That's the most important thing. We want you to really enjoy tonight. So it sounds like we're getting, so please let us know if that's coming through clear. All good. Thank you. So firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on Noongar Whadjuk land, the traditional owners of this country, before, past and present. I respect everything that they provided, and indeed they have shaped so much of what I am passionate about today. And I'd also like to acknowledge this extraordinary country that provides everything for us. And today is a little bit about honoring that in a very special way, about recognizing how that biodiversity can play such a powerful role in healing us and our landscapes and bringing back a little bit of that life into where we live. And we've got some amazing speakers for us with you tonight. Kathy Hubble is going to blow your mind with the art of creating out of natural ingredients and how that can create such a powerful vehicle to create beauty and magnificence in your own garden. And then two of my heroes, Mike and Mandy Bamford, who are two of WA's leading urban biodiversity ecologists. They're going to talk a lot about how we can create that in our own spaces. But I wanted to really set the scene, and my name's Chris Ferreira, by the way. I'm the director of the Forever Project. Behind the camera is the mighty Chris Woods, and also Lexi, who is one of our fantastic interns from Murdoch Uni. But today I really wanted to be able to talk to you about the essence of biodiversity and why it's so important. And I'll just tell you a little bit of my own story. We can sit on the front porch of my place in Hammy Hill. Some of you may have been through when we have the Hammy Hill Sustainable Home. And we can sit, and on certain days, I have Hakea petiolaris that has been planted on my eastern boundary. And on certain days, you can sit there, and if you're very quiet, you can have 5 to 10 black cockatoos feeding on the nuts of the Hakea, and they are frolicking within hand's distance of us. Now, David Attenborough would give his left kidney to see these rare, extraordinary birds that are found nowhere else on the planet. And they're feeding in my garden, not because I'm some great wildlife connoisseur, but fundamentally because we just create the sort of environment where they can feel welcome, where they can feel safe, and where they can get food. And pretty much that's what all of us want out of life. So for me, there are 5 critical principles if you want to bring biodiversity into your garden where you live. Number 1 is you need to firstly remember that the garden should be the biggest room of your home. That's the mantra that I say at all my talks. The garden should be the biggest room of your home. And what that means is you're taking a big, bold step in the opposite direction to the way Perth is going at the moment, which is big houses and tiny, tiny tacked on afterthoughts of gardens, which are often just artificial turf. Biodiversity means making space for the garden, celebrating and honoring that the garden can be the biggest room of your home. So what that means is we not only create a space where a garden can thrive and flourish, but we're also creating a space where we as humans can thrive and flourish, because the more time you spend outdoors, the more time that you spend away from the indoor cocoon of a home that's air conditioned, a breeding ground for viruses, I think you know where I'm going with that one, the more that we can spend time in healthy outdoor environments where we are as human beings more likely to spend time exercising, spending time in partnership with nature, which has all sorts of proven benefits to reduce stress, cortisol levels, and allow us to reconnect and recalibrate. So making the garden the biggest room of your home is extraordinarily important for everything that we want to do. when you start to think from that perspective, you get some really positive, fantastic benefits. Number one is once you start to make the garden the biggest room of your home, you start to improve your localized microclimate. Now, what I mean by microclimate, that means that that's the climate around your house. Now, we can't really change the weather. Of course, we are on a big international scale that's called climate change, but we can't affect how hot the winds are going to be, what the temperature is. But what we can do is we can moderate the negative impacts. And the best way to do that, to cocoon our house from the worst impacts of hot or cold and all those various things that are at the hard edges of our climate, the best way to moderate that is through improving the microclimate. And that is fundamentally by carefully choosing plants, trees, shrubs, ground cover. So trees and shrubs, for instance, on our eastern boundary can not only create the habitat where we can get the black cockatoos, etc., but on your eastern boundary, they're going to slow down, moderate, and even cool those hot, debilitating easterly breezes that blow like clockwork for 5 to 6 months of the year. So that's a really, really powerful thing that you can do. You can put trees and shrubs in the right spaces so they're shading your windows. And remember, when it comes to your house and how comfortable it is for you and how much you need to depend on air conditioning, fundamentally is a direct result of how well landscaped you have created those spaces around your home. So if you have a big house, lots of windows, no shading from trees and shrubs, you're going to have to rely a lot on artificial heating and cooling to keep that house moderated and comfortable. But if you choose the right plants and you put them in the right places, you can create the spaces where they're going to shield, screen, and protect you from the winds, but also the worst impacts of the hot sun in the summertime. So shading with beautiful native plants on your windows to the east and the west and even to the north can make a massive difference. I would interject and say deciduous trees between the northeast and the northwest is wonderful. They're not, strictly speaking, part of what we call biodiverse plantings because they're generally not, well, they're certainly not from Western Australia locally, but they can still play a hugely important role. And I've seen black cockies feeding on Cape lilac and different things like that. So even plants that aren't strictly native to this part of the world are going to be important. So rule number one, make the garden the biggest room of your home. And number two, linked to that, is your garden, if you design it carefully, can moderate your local environment. And linking into that is making sure that you shade any paved areas. So if you have concrete, tiles, bitumen, and God forbid artificial turf, which is the nemesis of biodiversity, if you can shade that with trees and shrubs, then you're going to moderate that environment, because all of those hot, hard surfaces absorb the heat on a hot day and then just release it when the sun goes down. So on a hot day, you continue that heat because you've trapped and stored through thermal mass that unwanted heat. So it's really important to shade. And the best way ultimately is to shade with trees and shrubs. So number two with biodiversity is the old landscaping mantra. The get out of jail card for all good landscapers is you put the right plants in the right place for the right reasons. I'll say that one again. It's so important. You put the right plants in the right place for the right reasons. So you're thinking about where you put your plants. You think about the soil. You think about what you want them to do in the garden. You think about how much room they have. Do they only have a narrow space? Do they only get a bit of winter sun or summer sun? The important thing is you think about your plants in the context of the climate and the conditions and what you want them to do for you, so that you can then create the opportunity for the right plant to go in the right place and deliver everything that you wanted it to do. That's when gardens work. But you see it so often, people don't put that little bit of thought and care into it. And what starts out as a wonderful, noble idea can unravel very quickly. And remember, gardening in WA is one of the toughest gardening environments on the planet. So if you factor in that we have terrible gutless sandy soils, particularly in South Perth, and we have those hot, dry winds, that we have a degraded urban landscape, you are fundamentally realizing that it's a really tough place to get your plants to grow. So the more that you can think carefully about the choices of plants, that will make a massive difference. And our next workshop that we're doing through this process is the, is going to be about creating a water-wise and fertilize-wise garden. So that's going to make a massive difference to help you create that space. So the right plants in the right place for the right reasons. Very, very important. The third thing in relation to biodiversity is diversity. That's why it's in the word biodiversity. And if you think about any beautiful ecosystem you've ever seen, a beautiful forest, even a beautiful prairie or grassland, if you look carefully, the fundamental integrity is because of the diversity, the suite of plants and animals and soil biology that are working together. So a biodiverse garden is one where you have a range of diverse plants, diverse functions, factors, shapes, topographies. Nature is not about having boring, uniform landscapes. And I urge you from a biodiversity point of view to try and make sure that you create landscapes that have a suite of diversity in there. So the fantastic stuff that Kathy and Mike and Mandy will be doing with you today are all about showing you how you can create these extraordinary opportunities for that diversity in that landscape. So what I'm talking about in relation to diversity is, sorry, my dog is just... Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, sorry, we nearly had a catastrophe with that dog of mine. If anyone wants a free old skanky dog, he's here. You can come and pick him up now or throw in a bag of dog food. So diversity is about, firstly, plant selection. So we say fundamentally you want to try and get some taller trees, middle story, shrubs and ground covers. And when you think about plants, the key thing to remember is the great bulk of diversity is from that height down. So try and get a suite of that ground cover, the understory. And that's really often where we have the greatest opportunity to put plants, and that's where we get the greatest opportunity for diversity. And when you think about diversity, that then opens up the opportunity to have so many colors, textures, and styles. So a biodiverse landscape, like a natural ecosystem, is rich, it's diverse, and your brain responds because it is hardwired to really get some succor and nourishment, literally, from seeing these landscapes. And neuroscientists are now working out that we see fractal patterns in nature, and we're hardwired to get some form of connection from those fractal patterns. And you can get that from the shadows of leaves, from the ocean, from ponds. So it's not surprising that humans find native gardens, biodiverse gardens, well-designed gardens calming and soothing, because we are hardwired to really feel a sense of connection to those spaces. So biodiversity allows you to do that. So getting the ground covers, the bigger stuff, taller, again, very, very important. And then we talk about diversity in terms of elements. So we talk about plants, yes, but then we can put in things like bird baths. We're going to show you some amazing gabions and other structures that not only look really good and quirky and can be art pieces in their own right, but they can be an amazing habitat for wildlife as well. So that's a range of different things. We talk about bird baths, as I said, logs, rocks. I love using rocks, sculptures, things like that, because if I can't put something in an area, there's shallow roots or there's rocks or it's just shady or things just don't grow, cool. A garden isn't just things that grow, it's things that are complementing the growing things. So as I said, logs, rocks, sculptures. You can never have too many bird baths or water points in your landscape. So again, a diversity of water points, because just like us, organisms need water. And that's very important. And in relation to that biodiversity, a few prickly plants are really important. And the advantage of prickly plants, particularly if they're near a water source, is they create a bit of habitat and a space for those poor animals we're trying to encourage to be able to be protected from the guys we don't want in the garden, which are the cats. And if you have cats that are roaming through your landscape, they are really going to do damage. And where I live in the city of Coburn, they're just bringing in a cat curfew, which I think is absolutely awesome, because at night, cats are just foraging through our landscapes, eating so many things. And Mike and Mandy may be talking tonight about just the terrible impacts of cats. And they don't have to be feral cats. Miss Moggy with her little bell is still going to be doing huge amounts of damage. So biodiversity is about keeping pets under control. Just as we have predator-proof areas when we're trying to protect habitats on a big area, well, we need to try as much as possible to keep dogs and cats out of our areas where we're trying to encourage the wildlife. So that diversity of plants, that diversity of other structures and features within there is important, and even mulches. So I do a lot of work now where I encourage people to use different types of mulches, wood mulches, stone and gravel, recycled materials. There's so many different types of mulches, and each one of them is not only going to look interesting on the landscape, but they're also going to be providing some really important habitat as well. And when it comes to you choosing your plants, that's the next thing that we'll talk about. Just very quickly, there's a range of different ways that we can get our plants. There they are in all their glory. The thing to remember with plants is whenever you're trying to buy a plant, it's important to remember that every plant that you buy, so this is one way you can buy them. This is called a sell tray. So I've got 64 plants in this guy here. And that means each one of these guys, they're about 60 cents each. And this is a beautiful dryland sedge called Phacenia. So this is a really good, quick and effective way to get plants established. And this is how revegetation organizations, big farmers do, that's farmers as in people who grow things on farms, do their planting. So that's a really good way to get plants. So that's called cell trays. You can buy tube stock. So this is typically available through nurseries like Apace, Trillion Trees, and other nurseries like that. So the important thing to remember is when you buy these guys, they are smaller to start with than our big guys here. But the root system has really been designed so that they're going to hit that beautiful moist soil. You plant them nice and deep, and they will very quickly start to establish into their improved soil, which I'll talk about at the next workshop that we do. Then you can get what's called, these are 130 or 140 mil pots. These are commonly available through nurseries like Bunnings, Dawson's. Dawson's is a fantastic nursery to get a lot of this quality of stock. So they give you a bit more of an instant look if you're trying to get that established, but these will probably retail for anywhere from $8 to $12 or $14 versus say 60 or 80 cents if you buy a tray of these. So depending on your budget, you can do that sort of thing. Here's something more advanced as well, but we obviously wouldn't recommend a plant like this guy here simply because look at how the roots are completely coiled around. This guy is bursting out of its pot. So much of the quality of your growth in your garden, that biodiverse garden you're trying to grow, is down to the quality of the plants that you buy. So if they're bursting out of the seams like this, if they're in the $2 bargain basement container, the chances are they're not really going to do well in your garden. But if you are getting them, make sure you get a good, sharp, clean pair of secateurs and cut those coiled roots back. So when you take it out of the pot, put it into improved soil, you've got rid of a large amount of that sort of deformity, so the plants can regrow and establish themselves in that landscape. The fourth thing about a biodiverse garden, really, really important in this space, is to be conscious of the fact you're trying to create habitat. So habitat is essentially a place where animals can firstly protect themselves from the impacts of predators, but it's also about making sure they feel safe and they can start to breed. So much of what Mike and Mandy and Kathy are going to be talking about is how you can create art pieces, how you can create amazing opportunities to get that biodiversity into your garden so that you can create those sort of spaces where you can encourage them to come and live. And remember, a lot of that biodiversity is not just the big guys, the black cockatoos, the iconic species that we want to have. They're really cool. But the more you get into this, the more you realize that biodiversity is frogs, lizards, skinks, and now so much of it is these beautiful little native insects, which are becoming more and more recognized. They're becoming iconic, and people are beginning to see that as they plant these things into their landscapes, they're starting to create their habitat where you can get the small guys back into that landscape. Very, very important stuff. And the final thing that I want to say about biodiversity is that management is still a really important part of this. So when you create a garden, it's one thing to start that process, but there isn't a garden out there that doesn't need some management. Now, management for a lot of you is fundamentally going to come down to controlling weeds. So if you are looking at putting in a beautiful biodiverse garden in your landscape, probably the bouncer that's stopping you from moving forward is things like cooch and kikuyu. The thing with cooch and kikuyu is that these are grasses that are typically growing in our urban spaces, and They are often used as lawn. It's the most popular, famous suite is the Cooch and Kikuyu lawns. And they are wonderful lawns, but they are also an absolute curse when it comes to what you can grow in your landscape, because they are extraordinarily tough and resilient weeds, and they can strangle out the best results of your beautiful plants. So very important when you're trying to put these gardens into space, you have to be dealing with weeds, getting on top of things like the Cooch and Kikuyu. How do you know if you have Cooch and Kikuyu? Well, it's pretty simple. If they're the ones that you try and pull them out of the ground and you have these rhizomes that are stiff and stuck and really difficult to get out, you probably all fought against them when you're weeding in your landscape. They are the ones, and those rhizomes can regrow, which allows them to have this resilience, which means when you put your plants in the ground, and if the Cooch and Kikuyu is still there, really important to remember, the Cooch and Kikuyu will always be more resilient, vigorous, and ultimately more successful than your preferred plants. So no matter what you do, you can unravel all of the effectiveness of your efforts if you don't put the effort into really good weed control before you start, and monitoring and managing and keeping on top of those weeds as you move forward. It's such an important part of that process. So I'm just about ready to invite the great Kathy Habel to come up and do her thing. And so Kathy, I've known for a long period of time. She's an extraordinary landscaper in her own right and designer, but what she's talking with you about tonight is how you can create the most extraordinary pieces of art for your garden that are going to be wonderful, wonderful additions to the biodiversity of your landscape. They're going to attract the wildlife, but they are beautiful pieces of art in their own right. So we're switching over to Kathy, and she's going to be doing her work over in this area here. Hello, Kath. Lovely to see you.
Hey, Chris.
So,
everyone can hear Kath, all right?
yeah. So can everyone hear Kathy?
Send a message.
Hello, hello.
Yep. Can you all hear Kathy? She's keep talking.
Here I am. Here I am. Hello.
Keep going.
Yeah. Okay. Just let us know.
I'm very passionate about.
Okay.
I'm very passionate about this topic, as Chris knows.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've given up my birthday evening to be here.
Oh, happy birthday. I didn't know it was your birthday. Happy birthday.
Yeah, I thought, what a nice way to spend my birthday.
Absolutely. So Kathy and I met a long time ago. We helped set up City Farm many years ago. And even then you were working with, I remember you making these amazing things out of dried seaweed. You were making hats out of dried seaweed. So show us what you wanted to do and play with today.
What I'd like to share today is that regardless of the size of your garden, you can create some aesthetically pleasing habitat for insects and frogs and lizards and things based on natural materials. So, and I say, I'm talking specifically about natural materials. I think it's really important to remember that although frogs will love to hang out in plastic containers, and they will, I've found them in shelving of paint tins of mine, plastic still leaches chemicals, and it's really important to think about the degradation of the materials that you choose over time. So fortunately, there's a lot of wonderful natural materials around, and a lot of these materials I've collected today to demonstrate mostly a gabion, but also some smaller pieces that you could make if you don't have room for a gabion.
So we better explain what a gabion is for everyone.
Well,
and here's
I'll
one in all its glory.
Can I move this
Yeah,
one out
you
the
certainly
way?
can. Our beautiful Ficinias can,
Yep.
they've done their thing.
I can just
Yeah.
stick
Put them over here. Okay.
Thank you very much.
And this in all its glory is a beautiful gabion.
Now, I don't know if everyone can see that. Yep, great. Okay.
So we use these a lot in landscaping, and they're vandal proof. They're fantastic. And I've traditionally filled them with rubble, but you introduced me to a whole new way of using gabions, which is super cool.
We've used these gabions, I made a few for Chris for pop-ups, for pop-up garden installations. And the benefit of using natural materials compared to rocks and rubble is obviously they're a lot lighter to move around. So depending on the materials you choose to put in them, they can be really easy just to move around and adjust position in the garden, or change them around if you want to.
And what's great about them is they come as a flat pack, and you just put them together. So they have these wire coils that you just thread through. They're really easy to put together. And then these little bracey bits, there they are.
That's the flat pack.
And then it has a lid that goes over the top. You can get them 2 meters long, lots of different shapes and sizes. You can put them together like Meccano. So they are fantastic.
And this one I've chosen to use today has got the smaller dimension holes. And that's because it's a little bit easier when you're putting in materials like loose leaf. They don't as readily fall out. So that's why I've chosen this one. And because of that, this one was slightly more expensive than the same size with larger holes. So it depends on the materials you're using. And of course, if you're building one in situ, you could use a variety of rubble and so on through the base, and then your soft material coming up the top. So this is obviously quite a big structure. If you haven't got room for big pieces like this, it's really easy to create some interesting, let me just grab this. Thanks, Chris. Getting all tangled up here. I hardly fit with all of my materials in this space. So this is a piece, a pot that I have bought recently to go with another pot for a client's garden. And I'm actually building a shelf to go on one of their walls as a nature shelf. So I was going to use this on there, and I'll probably put a few heavier rocks just in the base just to stabilize it a bit, although it is a sheltered position, along with rocks and other things.
And those branches, they're just from a verge collection?
These ones actually are a bit special. They're gorgeous.
No, they're beautiful. The colour on those, and
they come
against
from
the black.
Yeah, these ones come from a friend's bush property in Dudin, and it's Glycricarian, and it's a taller species of Glycricarian that grows out there, which dies back every summer. It dies right down and then comes back again fresh. So all of the old material is up for grabs.
It's gorgeous.
So yeah, sometimes I get a few nice little bits.
And that's one of the great things about a biodiverse garden is the contrasts. And just look at that beautiful subtle black versus the blue. It's a brown, I should say.
Yep.
Colorblind.
So, yeah, and sometimes you can find beautiful branches or individual pieces that are beautiful in their own right, and they stand out as, you know, really this is floristry, really. It's almost dried floristry.
But it's going to have habitat value.
But it's habitat value, yeah. So lizards can run around on this, and as long as it's stable enough, you can get little birds landing on the branches. It's actually pretty stable, this one. That's the only thing you need to look out for. There is a hole at the bottom, so it would be possible on a shelf situation to actually bolt it down into the shelf to make it even more stable. So that's one possibility.
You can happily leave that here in the office, Kath. That'll be fantastic.
I might be leaving it overnight, that's for sure.
Yeah, so, and while Kath's getting some other stuff, please send through any questions that you have. We're happy to answer those at any point in time. So you know how to do it. You just send it through, and we've got Lexi waiting for any of those questions that come.
First one gets a snake.
Yes, that's right. Gets a 10-foot carpet python. Yes. Which will fit nicely in your roof cavity.
Now, I see that Mike and Man, you've got some fabulous insect hotels coming up, which is great, because I had ideas about incorporating these things into the gabions, and I didn't have time to put them together. There was just too much to do. So with the following presentation, just bear in mind that you can incorporate those into a structure like this as well. And yeah, so this is something that I made a while ago from cut bamboo palm, I think it is, from in my area, in my neighbourhood, when there was a green waste. And these have got, like the bamboo, they've got tiny little holes, which are fantastic for different insects like native bees and so on. This one was looking a little bit ratty because when I did it, the pieces were green and they've actually shrunk a little bit. So they've loosened up and not really sitting very well. So I've just stuffed in a bit of extra material here, this palm leaf, which I found recently.
And what I love about this one, so you've taken 2 wire hanging basket frames.
That's right, yeah.
Tied them together, and then that could be hung. And the beauty of those, suddenly it just becomes a beautiful art feature, and they will become, like the fishermen talk about fish attracting devices when they create those fads in the bare sandy floor of an ocean. They start to put the rubble and it creates a habitat. That's essentially what you're doing here. And who would have thought a palm would suddenly have habitat value?
So how simple is that? That was pretty much collected off the verge, and I just chopped the ends of the pieces and just laid them in together. And that, again, that could sit on a shelf in the garden, sit on a wall. You could hang it off the fence, just put some holes in and hooks and hang it off somewhere. Yeah, very, very easy habitat, which I'm sure a lizard would absolutely love, or a gecko or something. Yeah.
And when you think about floristry and you go into really hoity, ritzy places, they'll have these extraordinary floral displays, often using something like that as a base with the flowers as well. So we've got, okay, so we've got a question. What stuff do you put in the gabbin, which is the soft? Okay, hold that thought. Kath's
I was just getting to that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we like to keep you mating. And I live in an apartment. Is it still possible to create habitats while Kathy is pulling all her things together? Absolutely. So you could imagine all of these things. And the beauty of insects is they're going to fly. So if you create a habitat, and one of the things from stealing a great line from a film, if you build it, they will come. And that's the same with frog ponds, but it's definitely the case even, and the beauty in an apartment, if you have things that are bright and showy, so planting lots of plants that have colorful flowers in the yellow, the green, the blue and the purple is going to attract a lot of insects to your garden. So smells as well. So you could have a little bird bath there as well. And even in an apartment, that's right, isn't it, Kath?
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember meeting Indira Naidu, who used to be one of the newsreaders for SPS. And I did a talk with her once, and she became passionate about balcony gardening, fundamentally because she bit into this beautiful apple that someone had given her at a market, and she had an epiphany about the way we grew food, and suddenly realized that you could grow so much, even 10 stories up, and have lots of different things. That's one way to shut me up. So Kath is busy doing that. Smells. So what eucalypts have you put in here?
This is probably Mary, I think. So this is actually regrowth from a fire break.
Yeah, it looks like it's snapped off there, so you can see the
family bush property. So they were actually broken off when they were green to stop them regrowing, because they were growing right on the road. And over summer, they kind of got thrown on the burn piles, and over summer they turn these beautiful colours. So they caught my eye when I was up there last time, as did the burnt sticks that were still remaining in there. So I thought, well, that's carbon sequestration there.
Damn straight.
Rescuing them out of the burn piles.
It's really interesting when we talk about our FireWise developments, and one of our talks, we're going to be talking about the principles of FireWise gardening, etc. really, really important to remember that once you have blackened logs, they don't burn anywhere near as well anymore because you've volatilized or burnt off all the highly combustible materials. So you can start to put beautiful blackened trunks, logs, and even smaller pieces like this into landscapes. And there is nothing quite as sexy in a landscape as burnt black, I can use that tautology, beautiful rusted materials, nice bleached white limestone rocks, and then some coffee rock. Before you know it, you've got these incredible contrasts, and they just work so well together. So what Kat's doing now, you've got a change in the shape and the color and the texture.
Yep.
So you're kind of laying this
change.
like a lasagna.
Yeah.
And I'll help you here.
Thank you.
Oh.
And it's amazing how much material you can cram into one of these gabions. My car was full of material.
Did you want the
big one?
Yeah,
yes,
the I've forgotten the name. K Paris.
So
Magnolia.
while you're doing this, you can be thinking about how you can incorporate even some more habitat into here. So you pass me those jars there, Chris.
Yep.
So, for example, I was thinking about my little frogs in the garden, and I reckon they would absolutely love little, clean little hidey holes like that. So just embedding them here and there, and they're nice and safe in that material.
And when we've done a lot of these in the past using rubble, we put in all sorts of different things. So bricks are really cool as well, particularly the bricks that have got the holes right through the middle. And they look pretty quirky when you put a few of those into that mix as well. So if you wanted this to be light, so hopefully this one will be used at one of our pop-ups into the future as well. That's the hope.
I see.
Very funky, yeah. I'm stealing it, and everyone here heard me steal it.
This is new to me. Because imagine it in my garden.
Yeah, I can imagine it in everyone's garden.
Now,
Okay,
is that the last of that?
Yep.
Okay, so
You want this beautiful Triandra?
what I want actually is some of the big burnt branches on the other side.
Yep.
So what I'm going to do is actually have the branches going upright, because although this comes with a top, and you can put the top on it, and then you could use that to put a seat on it, or a bird bath, or something else. You could put a sculpture like that sitting on the top of it, so it becomes a whole pedestal for another piece. This time I was thinking to actually incorporate some of these branches sticking upright in it. So these gabions, as you've probably seen, have come with a cross brace, and that is really handy for wiring pieces on. Whoops, there we go. So I'm going to have to.
Do you want these straighter ones instead? No.
Actually, a straighter one. No, I think that would work if you want to
Put a straighter one in.
I'm going to use you. You can hold that.
Oh, goody. At last, my reason for being.
Thank you, Chris.
Okay.
This is a tricky bit, and obviously sometimes having an extra pair of hands is helpful. Let me just grab my wire.
So the beauty of this is, this is a beautiful bit of burnt marri, and they have habitat value in their own right. It's interesting too, when people talk about fire, we often think it's the big trees, and they're the first that are sacrificed when people are trying to make their property more fire safe. But the reality is it's the fine fuels, the fine stuff that are surrounding Kat's beautiful blackened sections here. These are the first to burn. So it's the logs and the branches that are slower to burn. So if fire is at all a concern for you, then it's the fine fuels that are the big issue, not not these bigger guys. So these actually have massive habitat value for us. So we really try and encourage people wherever they can to keep those blackened logs. And if they are blackened, as I said, they're the ones that they're not actually going to burn. When embers land on a blackened log, they're not going to cause a problem. And what if the gabbing gets wet? Well, Kath,
just be aware of your materials. So obviously materials that are more dense and compacted. So if it was just pure leaf, if there was no branch and space around them, that they could dry out more quickly. The longer they stay wet, those materials, the more likely they will rot down over time. So that is a consideration. And that's why in this case, I've decided to use some of the really big chunky leaves, which I found recently on a green waste collection.
So, and of course,
magnolias. So these will take years, actually, to break down.
That's the beauty of the waxy leaf. And of course, the other gabions, which are much, much more difficult to move around, but are made with all the recycled rubble. It doesn't really matter at all whether they get wet. So it just depends. But you could have this under a veranda, so it's going to stay dry if you had a space like that. So there's lots of different ways that would help in that space as well. Very good question. That's a thinker's question.
All right. How are you going, Chris? Can you hold that one?
Yep. Oh, yep, like that. Okay.
I think you're right. I think that this curly one's not working. I think I get rid of that one. It's just going.
It does look pretty cool in there, though.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, if it got wired together like that one in there, like that.
All right. Yep.
So
we'll see. It is.
And these gabions are really easy to get hold of now. A lot of garden centers sell these now. I bought them from places like Creation Landscapes. Strata Green is a company that sells them.
I got these ones.
Bunnings sell them. They're really easy to get hold of now. So they're called gabions, and they've been used for a long time. In I remember first seeing them in the Himalayas. They used big ones to hold back the banks that were slipping and sliding where the rocks were falling onto the road. So gabions started off with an engineering life, but they now have got huge habitat value, and we use them all the time in our landscaping because they just are so durable and they can look so striking and wonderful in that space. And you can get really good black hands. Yeah. Very handy. Yay. Gloves.
Normally, I would be walking all the way around, and probably the height wouldn't be quite as tall as this, so it would be a little bit easier. Often I work with them on the ground, so it does make it a little bit easier to get the materials balancing a little bit more nicely, and you can really, initially you can just stuff in, and even sticky bits, like you can really use a lot of the material.
And it really does become like a lasagna. So you'll start to see those different layers in this space. And when they get wet as well, Kath, you know, just having a little bit of rain, the colors change. So they really change as they age or with the seasons, the light on them. And it's pretty extraordinary when you hear insects and skinks, etc., scurrying through, when you really know it's created a bit of a habitat.
Now that jar is facing upwards, which I don't want because that's going to fill up with water. So I'm just going to take him out and just put that leaf in there and just...
And obviously if it fills up with water, then it's going to breed mosquitoes and things like that, which is what we don't want.
Yeah, so just have a think about that sort of thing when using the materials. Just imagine what's going to happen over time under different conditions. Oh, I love this one.
So this is one of our beautiful magnolias. This is probably K. Paris, which doesn't necessarily have a great deal of habitat value, but it's really popular. And yeah, getting a new lease of life for biodiversity. So often when people think about their gardens, and we'll talk a lot about this with our next workshop, which is on WaterWise and FertilizeWise, one of the huge problems people face is water repellency. And one of the big culprits is we have a lot of plants that have those waxy leaves. That's not the whole problem, but it certainly compounds that. So it's important to keep that in mind, that many of our plants have those waxy leaves that can make gardening a little bit tough. So when you make a ball one, is it made in 2 halves or is it stuffed from the outside, Kath?
I did try both ways, and I found it much easier to make it whole and then stuff it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. They look, because you can then come from all directions, so you're not getting 2 distinct halves in the piece.
Yeah.
But it might depend on your materials as well. So for some finer materials, it probably wouldn't matter. It might be easier, and you could always just kind of.
And we've got another couple of questions. So are the gabions made of galvanized wire? Yes, they are. You can also buy materials called corten. Corten steel, we use a lot of corten steel now. We'll use those as square or round planters, and they rust. Well, they go rust colored. They're designed to rust, and they don't corrode, and they look absolutely beautiful. So you'll get this beautiful rust color on these corten planters. And again, it looks sensational contrasted here. So these gabions being galvanized, they're going to be here for 30, 40 years, no problem at all. So that's something else.
Thanks, Chris.
I can actually help. Yep, yeehaw. So yeah, they're going to last a long time, and they're not expensive. These kits like this are about $60 or $70, so they're not particularly expensive. And as I said, they're awesome to put through landscapes. Kath mentioned, particularly when you fill them with rubble, we put recycled wood on top and make these beautiful benches. We often fill them with recycled material. We get a lot of our recycled material from an amazing company called Red Sands. So they do a whole range of construction and demolition rubble. So that's waste products, which are often tiles, bricks. And when you break them up into big chunks and put them into these gabions, they look absolutely beautiful. So we've always done them with heavy materials, which means once they're there, you don't move them. But Kathy's are just sensational because you can move them around. Love it.
Okay, we're just about there, but you can see it's amazing how much material has been squashed into here. It's just
Stopping down the side here.
oops.
Nice work. Get the flourish happening.
That's still not quite right, but you could work. I mean, that's quite a nice thing for a bird to land on, that one there. And just tweak these around. I'll just finish off just with this last bit in here. So what I usually do at the end is just have a bit of a look around and just see if there's any spots that are really a bit thin on material, and just pay attention to those. Any on that side, Chris?
No, yeah, a little bit on this side here. So you can see how predator proof this will be, and that jar sticking up a little bit. So we'll just put that jar so it's facing down a bit more. So a great place for a gabion like this would be, yeah, as we said, if you have a big tree and you just can't get anything to grow under it because it's just roots close to the surface, etc., then gabions like this make absolutely beautiful features put into those spaces.
Just to hide that. There we go.
All right.
Better. So for the other gabions that I did for Chris, one thing that was interesting was using the faces so that you could, for example, fill it up square and then put something on the top that would contain a different material. Say you could use a hanging basket upside down in there and then stuff that so that there was a round circle of material on the top surface, so that you had a round within the squares. So there's different ways that you can play with constructing the, so you could, for example, have sticks visible on the sides. And I did that with other ones as well.
You did.
Yeah, so that's
Okay, there you go. Look at that.
And then you could just, oops, there goes one little one there. Kind of, you know.
Hang that up.
Something like that. Or
Pretty
hang it above.
extraordinary. And then you look at those contrasts and look at this beautiful. So this is a true local native. So we got a Dryandra here. So that, again, look at the contrasts and those colors. And that's, I just love that about design. Is it's often so much about contrast, about creating different spaces in there. And if you have a think about that. Yeah,
really looking at the materials around you. So many people with their gardens, something dies or it gets pruned and it dries out, and it's considered ugly, and dead things are considered ugly. And I'm a bit of a fan of dead materials, all sorts of dead materials.
Yes.
They have really beautiful textural qualities and do have different colorations when they dry, and really can be quite beautiful. It's just a matter of sometimes people struggle with the idea of messiness in their gardens, and dead things are messy and they want to tidy up and everything. Yeah, so this is a way of kind of tidying and containing and organizing the material in a way that's more aesthetically pleasing, and you're still getting the benefits of all of the habitat hidey holes for creatures in your garden.
So we've had a couple of questions. So how long does the soft fill gabion last? So we kind of talked about that. It depends on the material, but if you had it under cover, this is going to last years.
Years and years if it's under cover and protected. Yeah.
And even if this is getting wet, you've got a lot of air spaces through. So if the decomposition, which is really what's going to break this down, is if it's compacted and it's permanently moist, that's when it'll break down really quickly. But because there's a lot of air ventilation and really dry, waxy material, this, even if it gets wet in winter, is going to last a few years. And then the burnt logs, are they termite proof? Well, it depends entirely on the species. If it was carry, you could put a level 10 force field around it and the termites would still find it. So it really depends on the species. So fundamentally, termites are more likely to go for a material that is in the ground or big chunks of it close to the ground. So I've got some gorgeous old sleepers that I have sticking out of the ground for aesthetics, and the termites have just nailed them. So something like this is not really going to be predated on by termites.
No,
it's interesting too, material. On that score, when we talk about termites, we're just building 2 apartments in the back of our garden, blending in with the garden. And the system we're using to control the termites is really what we call a sentinel system. So spraying, so often people spray with different things, or they'll use something like a lawn beetle killer, and you do so much damage to your ecosystem. And I guess that's what we're trying to say here, is that when you create biodiversity, that's wonderful, right, but you've got to be responsible for that ecosystem. And
I've just been doing a bit of research on glyphosate along those lines. So there's some good alternatives to that too now. So.
And it's interesting, and we'll talk about weed control at the next workshop, which is on the FireWise. And I've just learned dropping the pH of the Roundup or the glyphosate mixture is hugely important. It actually doesn't work well unless it's at about 2.7, which is really acidic. They don't tell you that. Can you put soil and some plants into the gabion from the side? You can. We've done some gabions where we put planters in here. So you can have self-watering pots, which you could put into here. So you keep them contained, and then they can spill out and grow. So yeah, absolutely. I can see into the future, you're going to see more and more. Imagine walking into your favorite funky cafe and seeing this as a piece with plants growing through there. It's amazing. And things like some of our beautiful mushrooms. Look at that. We've already got some wildlife on there. Chris, come on, the wildlife photographer. He's not very well camouflaged. He's bright white little spider. So he's going, oh my God, it's all black.
Little jumping spider.
Here he is in all his glory. He's not moving for you, Woodsy. There he is a little bit. Nice work. So yeah, it just shows. And the more I look at this, just the different colors and the charcoaling, it is extraordinary. It's beautiful. Yeah. So in terms of art spaces, other things, so you've got a range of other different materials. What were you planning on doing with this funky old thing?
This funky old thing, this is just another example of, you really don't need to have, in terms of habitat creation, it doesn't have to be fancy. So this was just an old basket I had outside, not really doing much. And I thought, well, you could just simply fill this up with a bit of material and just pop it somewhere in the garden for the lizards and insects to enjoy. And yeah, I've run out of material now, that it's taken so much. But yeah, it doesn't have to be much, or even a bag of, even a basket full of leaves, and you have habitat for something. You'd be really surprised at how quickly insects and lizards will take advantage of something simple that you provide in the garden.
And there's a huge advantage with hanging these things up as well. So
yeah,
that's a big part of what can help us. As the material breaks down, do you add more or start again? That's a good question.
Up to you. Depends what's going on with the gabion, and you know, if you're totally over it and you've seen something really nice on your Verge green waste, your local green waste collection, oh, I think I'd like to use that. This one was green when I collected it, and I hung it up and dried it out for a couple of weeks. So it's a good idea, if you do collect green materials, to dry them out first, because they will shrink a lot, and they're also more likely to start composting if there's a mass of wet, moist green material.
So that's
together.
the key. And you hang them, so just like when you see the dried flower arrangements, they've hung them upside down, good ventilation.
Just with a couple of hooks.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that really helps, a big part of this. The other really important thing at this time of the year, when we get a bit more of these breaking rains, you're going to start to see erupting out of the ground so many of the beautiful fungi. So we always say in our workshops, seeing them erupting out of the ground should be as joyous as when you see earthworms in the garden. Do you want to explain why that's such an important indicator of a healthy landscape and for biodiversity?
Because it means that, for starters, it's not a toxic environment. Fungi are very sensitive to poisons and chemicals and so on. So it's not using them as a good way to get more of a diversity of fungi happening. Also very sensitive to a lot of disturbance. So it's a sign that you've got some biodiversity there, and the more variety there is, the better.
Yeah, it's such an important part. So they'll start erupting out. Do you know some of the fungi we'll expect to see coming out of the South Perth gardens in that sandy soil?
Oh, look, I've seen all sorts. Yeah, a whole range of things. The one very common one are the little parasol fungi. They're kind of shaped, well, like an umbrella, and they're typically very delicate and grey. They're one of the earliest ones to start popping up, I find, in our garden at least.
Those first range.
And they usually last a day, mostly just a day. They're amazing. You've got to really keep an eye out for them.
So have you ever, the question is, have you ever taken any of these structures apart and assessed what's living in there?
Not yet, no.
That would be an amazing thing to do.
Be very interesting, yeah.
And Mike and Mandy will probably talk about just some of the incredible biodiversity that you can have in some of our big iconic trees, and a huge plug for keeping those beautiful big trees. So if we're lucky enough to have those beautiful remnants, so South Perth, that could be Jarrah, or it could be some beautiful Banksias, or maybe some Marri, those gorgeous big trees. They can be just absolute treasure troves for organisms living in and on them, and any of that material. So you use a lot of bark at different times as well. Bark's such a useful part of your...
and material that usually often gets raked up and thrown in the green waste. And there's some beautiful bark pieces around. So some of the other gabions I've done for Chris incorporate quite a lot of bark and upright. So you can, I think particularly lizards really love that upright layered sort of structure to run through and hide in. And they're quite beautiful with their textures and colours as well.
And again, when they get rain on them, just amazing. And people
durable.
And people forget, when it comes to biodiversity, we have some of the most extraordinary ecosystems on the planet. And Mike and Mandy will talk about that, about, you know, just how rich and treasured this ecosystem is that we live in, and we can bring it so quickly back. So anyone who was concerned about this for the impact of fire, we would be lying if we said that this would not increase the risk of fire. So if you're in a high fire risk area, you would really put this close to where you can protect it from the impacts of ember attack. But if you're living in a beautiful part of Australia, South Perth, where you don't have those issues, this is just such an important part of creating those amazing habitat structures for the garden.
If you did have fire issues and fire did go through your community, and you had these gabions protected and on hand, then their immediate habitat when everything else is gone.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
And Mike and Mandy, we've done some workshops with them in the past about looking at having structures that you can bury into the ground. So they've talked about clay pipes, and I hope I'm not stealing their thunder, but that's a really powerful way. So that's a really important point that you bring up, that after a fire, you know, a lot of the attrition is just simply not the fire itself, but it's the fact they've lost their habitat, they've lost their food source. And so putting in these structures into that place would be an amazing way to give some instant relief.
And you'll probably be saving a few of them at the same time.
Indeed. And obviously, if you are in a high fire risk area, then that's when the recycled rubble can be used, and beautiful art forms, but they're not going to burn. And obviously that gives you that beautiful habitat, and they're good protection. If the fire front is coming through, they can nest and hide in there and be protected from the radiant heat as well, which is a big part of that process. So we've talked about all those different things that are in the mix. Any other things that you'd weave into this art that we're talking about on your garden? Where does water come into the mix, and providing that water for organisms?
Yeah, it's so important. And that goes, you know, as far as making sure that the water, the rain that falls is actually penetrating the garden properly. So all of the soil microbes and the life in the soil, the fungi, everything depends on that rain actually getting in. And also you can use gabions, actually deliberately water them if it's really hot and you want to create a little bit more humidity and protection for things in the really hot weather as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've done that with my rubble gabions. So you put the water in so it filters slowly through, and then it just permeates down into the soil. So it's a really powerful way to protect, and then plants are going to benefit from having those nearby. But you just have a look at the contrast here. If I get this guy, and you immediately see, look at that beautiful contrast with that Dianella. That's what this guy is in the foreground, that beautiful lime green against that black. There are other lamandras, different other plants like that have a beautiful lime colored, and lime color just goes so beautiful against the black. And if you had some beautiful pieces of rock in here, maybe some really fresh limestone, that black against that white is so striking.
And the other thing you can do with these is stack them. So we've used them before, where you put one on top of the other, and then you get some instant height. And in that case, you've got, you know, I could see this in relation to a bird bath or some other water source, where the birds could land on this quite happily and go down and have a drink.
It's a
Have a
really,
bath.
really important part of
Yep.
that process. So we're going to have a break.
We might run the survey as well.
Yes. So very important to run the survey. So you'll see there's a fantastic survey. We would really love you to fill that survey out for us. It's a hugely important part of what allows us to be able to, so we've just launched that survey now. It makes it really, really important for us to get that feedback so we can find out what you think about it, how you're learning through this process. And remember, when you take the step to really embrace biodiversity on your landscape, you're not only doing it for you, but you really will start to change other people's minds as well. When they come and see a garden that is alive, remember, we're hardwired to respond and really get a great deal of peace and tranquility and restorative value out of gardens. So when you go to a beautiful garden that is looking good, it makes a big difference. And I would bravely and boldly say, please adopt your verge. And again, City of South Perth has some fantastic guidelines and support for you to really invade that verge space. That might just be grass, and South Perth has a lot of grass, and you can put some beautiful, extraordinary extensions of your biodiversity work onto that verge. It's amazing stuff.
Yeah.
So, so many different things to consider when you are doing that, and there is a lot in that space, but really importantly, you can make a massive difference on that verge and really extend that habitat. So they talk about them in terms of ecological stepping stones. So that's what our gardens become, don't they?
Yeah, so important. And what really strikes me, if I do any country travel, I come back to the city, and after summer it can be dead and dry and really quite parched further out. And you come back to the city and there's green and life, and we're so blessed with the availability of water in the city. I think it's just about criminal to be wasting it on lawns which aren't being used in a functional way, just simply because it's the done thing, without considering what valuable resources are being wasted that could be put to much, much better use, and actually creating the space in the cities as a refuge for our wildlife.
It's so true. And, you know, we've done calculations where a verge lawn, which doesn't get used, as we say, if you see anyone on the verge lawn, kicking a football, reading the newspaper, having a picnic, bring it on, but you don't. So you've got this lawn that gets mowed and fertilized, and you might be using 60 to 80,000 litres of water to keep a piece of lawn looking green, which no one uses. And when we are seriously running out of water, which we are, you can put in a beautiful biodiverse verge alternative that will use a fraction of that water. So I know when I'm putting my gardens in, and I think you've touched on it there, it is important to remember that biodiversity is about water. We can't escape that. We can be water wise, definitely. And you can have a native garden where you don't water it over summer, and it will probably survive, but it'll look like someone who's done back-to-back marathons by the time we come around to the first breaking rain. So it is tough on those gardens, but if you can give them a bit of water over the summer, it makes a huge difference. And I use the analogy, when you go to Kings Park, probably everyone knows the two cafes there, the Zamia and Botanicals, and they have the most exquisite, beautiful native gardens around them, but they're watered twice a week. Then you step over the fence into Kings Park, and that's not watered, but it suffers over the summer. So we're not saying that a biodiverse garden survives without water. It will do much better with judicious use of water and getting that water into the soil. Really, really important stuff. So we're going to wrap up. We hope you've been able to do that evaluation for us. So, yep, we're going to have a 15-minute break. So we're going to be back on board in 15 minutes, which is fantastic. So please go and have a cuppa, have a bit of a loo break, start your gabions, rip out a bit of lawn. You've got 15 minutes. You should be able to get rid of at least 30 square meters of that.
We might just cut the audio and we'll just keep that running just while we're packing up.
Yes. Okay. So when we come back, we'll have the amazing Mike and Mandy who are going to do this extraordinary bit of information for you about biodiversity in the garden and what is possible. They've got a fantastic presentation to show you as well. and then we'll wrap up with a bit of Q&A and pulling it all together with some of those key aspects of biodiversity. So have a quick break. Please come back. And as Chris said, we'll keep some audio running so you can see just the vision. Just the vision. Sorry, just the vision, not the audio. Yeah. All right. Thank you for joining us for this first half as well. Good on you.
Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you've had a nice break and you're pumped and primed for the second half. It's my great honour to introduce Mike and Mandy Bamford, who are, as I keep saying, two WA's premier. I can't even say that anymore. Whatever. Oh my God, it's all falling out of my mouth. Two amazing ecologists who are passionate about creating biodiversity in your gardens. They walk the talk. We've done lots of workshops together, haven't we, over the years? And you're going to be blown away. Lots of images from your own garden as well?
Yes. We have, yes. Yeah. And it's so exciting to see what Kathy's been doing. So much of what Kathy talked about is just going to feed into what we're going to talk about as well. It's just so many fabulous ideas there to bring wildlife into your garden. It's so exciting.
So you're going to love this next section. We'll be back and we'll do a roundup at the end of this talk and any more questions. So please keep the questions coming. And as you know, we've got these other two fantastic events coming up. So we'd love you to come to as many of these as possible. Okay.
Thanks, thank you. Fantastic. Right. Well, it's great that you could join us, and whether you're in South Perth or wherever you are in the world, we'll be able to talk about some of the ideas that will bring things into your garden. And Kathy has spoken about some fabulous ways that you can increase habitat. And I guess what we're really doing, Mike, really is mimicking what would be in nature, aren't we?
Well, that's right. We're taking advantage of our gardens, and I like to think that we're making our little bit of Australia more Australian by making the plants in there and the animals in there that belong in Australia.
Yeah, because if you think about that gabion structure that Kathy made, that was really mimicking leaf litter on the ground, and you're just controlling it into a sort of tidy structure that fits into your garden design, but it's still performing that really important function of providing structure and shelter for so many different creatures. And we'll look through some of the items we've got on our table a little bit later, but some of those items that we have here, things like Banksia cones, we've certainly used in gabion structures, and they're fabulous because they've got lots and lots of little holes and crevices for creatures to tuck into. We've also put insect hotels, fauna shelters as parts of gabion structures as well. So you can use that structure in so many different ways. And actually, we're great fans of secondhand bits of equipment, and salvage yards are fantastic places to find things that you can use if you don't want to buy a new gabion structure. We've used old oven frames, haven't we?
We have used old oven frames, ramps from a service workshop for the vehicles as the sides of a gabion wall, and yes, with about $5 worth of broken bricks thrown inside to
I think the whole structure cost about $10 from a salvage yard. And yet it's great habitat. So there are so many ways that you can create habitat without it costing you a lot of money. So I suppose it would be quite nice to go through and just look at the sorts of creatures that you might attract. I know there were a couple of questions early on about the sorts of wildlife that might use these structures. So maybe, Mike, we'll just flick through some of those.
Run through what you might get.
Yeah, so we'll just flick over to a PowerPoint. So we'll be there in the background and just look at some of these amazing creatures and some of the principles that we'll then demonstrate later on. So just flicking over to that PowerPoint and looking at the ways that you can increase biodiversity right in that urban space, which is so, so important. So how are we going, Chris? We're in there now. Fantastic. All right. Excellent. So just let us know if anything goes pear-shaped and it's not working. So
excuse me.
Ecology, and of course, I'm sure you all know this, but ecology is all those amazing creatures that live in our environment and the interactions between them. So in a natural piece of bushland, say in South Perth 200 years ago, all these creatures that we've got illustrated would have been in that environment, wouldn't it, Mike?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. A whole range of different plants, insects, everything either sort of eating stuff or being eaten, to be honest. That's how ecology works.
That is the way it works. Now, of course, what happens in an urban situation too often is that species start to disappear for whatever reason. They just don't quite have the habitat they have. Maybe it's a little bit broken up. there's invasive species or toxins, pesticides, and gradually you find that the species disappear and you end up with a couple of species maybe. Now, actually, Mike, you grew up in South Perth, didn't you?
I did, yes, in the 60s and 70s. And it was a very sad place in many ways for a child obsessed with wildlife, because there wasn't much wildlife in South Perth. It was all lawn and jacarandas. There was one little patch of bush over in Kensington where I used to sort of sneak off to on my old bike and get my fix of nature. But the nice thing about suburbs is that even South Perth then, it's still an ecosystem. Nature abhors a vacuum, so there's still something that'll find space to live. And so it's up to us to find, to make more spaces, if you like.
Yeah. So I guess South Perth was pretty much the singing honey eater and marble geckos and, Jacksonia, a couple of little species that still hung on.
Yeah.
But that was about it. So we want to do a lot better than that. And already South Perth does do a lot better than that. Already it's so much better, isn't it, Mike?
Yes, we're having friends telling us that they are now seeing New Holland honeyeaters in South Perth. I never saw a New Holland honeyeater in South Perth. That the wagtails disappeared in the 60s and didn't come back for decades. It was just a rather sad place. So it's nice to hear of reports like that coming in.
Yeah. So it is a choice. We have a choice. What sort of suburb do we want? What would you like to live in? And there's this sort of suburb. And now we'll just see. We'll see if the sound works.
Audio works.
Because we're like this. We actually ran out to a few different suburbs around near where we live and put a microphone out to see what sorts of sounds we heard in that suburb. So this was the sounds of this suburb here. Now, I'm not sure if that's working for you.
If it's really silent, that's okay.
Okay, we can increase our volume. Yep, we get it. You can wave if you're getting sound. Okay, it is very silent because there was pretty much nothing calling. So then this suburb, which was the next suburb over, which had a lot of native plants, this was the sounds of that suburb. Now,
if it's not working, I'll do some bird call imitations.
Just ask if everyone's hearing that.
Yeah.
Someone could just message through, just let us know if they can hear that.
Yep.
Excellent. Okay,
great.
Good.
So as you can hear, the second suburb has the most amazing volume and there's no volume.
Okay.
All right, Mike's going to do a quick imitation.
Imagine lots of bird calls.
And so look, I think I'll just see if we can.
There will be chitty chitty from wagtails.
Hold on. See if I can hear now.
How are we going?
Can you just ask everyone if they can hear?
No.
Okay.
Well, that's all right.
Right along.
We can always, we'll post it on social media later on.
Yeah.
But the difference is quite marked because the second place has the most amazing range of calls, honey eaters, willy wagtails, all sorts of noises.
Yep.
Now, if you just stand there and listen, which do you think sounds like a healthier suburb? And it's really obvious whenever we've asked people at workshops, it's really obvious that that second sound is so much healthier. So the soundscape of a suburb is a really good indicator of the health of that suburb, because as Chris was mentioning earlier, biodiversity is healthy for people. It's not just better for wildlife, it's actually better for us as well. So if I were buying a house, I would probably be standing in that suburb and listening. What do you think, Mike?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But yeah, if it's got a healthy sound to it, that helps sell houses.
So all these real estate agents out there, keep your trees. And there's another thing, as well as having greenery, what sort of greenery you choose makes this huge difference. So the beautiful, perfect leaves of things like buxus hedges are, they may look superficially lovely and green, but the reason that they're perfect, the reason that the leaves are perfect is that basically nothing lives on them. So the plant on the right, which is an acacia, so a wattle called kujong, local wattle, has 130 different types of insects that live on that one plant. not 130 insects, but 130 different species, which is extraordinary.
Phenomenal.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
So if you think about it from a biodiversity point of view, which one would you use? They can both be used in gardens, in quite formal gardens, but which would you use? You'd use the one that had a greater use for biodiversity. And we need to sort of change the way we think about it too, don't we, Mike? I mean, the perfect leaf, to me, I just look at it and think it's a desert. Whereas a beautiful chewed gnarled leaf, if you look at that, you can see almost the story of the leaf and all the things that have fed on it or lived in it in its life. So it has a real beauty in those colours and the shapes of all those little creatures that have lived in it. So yeah, we like to rethink our garden. Maybe we're weird, I don't know.
No, not at all.
So think about those amazing creatures, the grey fantails or the little fairy orchids. Oh, tell about our orchids.
We're very proud of our orchids. Our garden had been cleared in the 1920s. The land had been cleared in the 1920s. We bought it in the late 80s. When we put in native plants, the garden developed leaf litter. And after about 15 years, we had orchids popping up through the leaf litter. And that's a real achievement as a gardener. These orchids, seeds are tiny, they blow in the wind long distances. They'll only germinate if they match up with the right sort of fungus almost at the moment of germination. So to get fairy orchids to grow into a garden, you've got to have the right sort of leaf litter, the right sort of fungus and the seeds all at the right time. Then they've got to grow and produce flowers. We now have 20 or 30 fairy orchids popped up in our garden among 3 other orchid species as well. So that's a gardening triumph, which took nothing but leaf litter and time.
So that's the other thing actually about native gardening is actually lazy gardening. Biodiversity gardening, a lot of it, you leave things alone. So leaving things alone for years at a time is often the way that these little creatures and beautiful native plants find their ways back because they're not disturbed. And the fungi that Kathy and Chris were talking about earlier, they also, the spores need that time and that biodiversity in the soil, don't they, to help them to grow. So allowing that natural process to happen is really, really valuable in your garden.
And it's probably worth thinking of soil as really the start of where biodiversity starts, because soil is a combination of inorganic and organic and living material. The fungi and bacteria that just live in the soil all make up part of what goes on and makes the soil function to support plants.
So jumping back to South Perth, the ecosystems that would have been there a couple of 100 years ago, things like Jarrah and Narre, as Chris mentioned, also Banksia woodland, the riverine and freshwater swamps, and of course the river, because the Swan River really wraps around South Perth and it's a really important part of that whole ecosystem in the promontory there. So the council has been doing all sorts of work with the urban forest scheme to try and rebuild some of the biodiversity that was in that area. And that's something that everyone can help with. And even if you're not in the City of South Perth, your local council will be working on biodiversity and urban forest programs to try and rebuild that biodiversity. So before there were settlers, there were huge numbers of species, weren't there, Mike?
Oh, absolutely. Typical of the Perth area, 9 or 10 frog species, massive number of reptile species. Perth's actually one of the richest cities in the world for reptiles. Most of them are harmless, lovely things like bobtails and blue tongues, many bird species and a good range of mammal species, things that have almost gone, some even extinct species of mammals that once occurred in the greater Perth region. And of course, invertebrate spiders, insects, that sort of thing, just thousands of species.
Yeah, so just incredible. So looking at South Perth, just the little tiny microcosm as it is now and as it was, we actually found these photos we were given, and they turned up in an old projector. So they're an old-fashioned slide film. This was as the Narrows Bridge was being built, and this one and the next photo just show you the incredible mudflat areas that were either side of the promontory at South Perth in the, what was it, Mike, late 50s?
Late 50s,
yeah.
Late early 60s, about the time I was born. Look, that's looking from Kings Park down towards the South Perth Peninsula and then into Mounts Bay. Mounts Bay was in fact once a bay. It wasn't an interchange of roads.
Yeah. So looking at it now, though, it's quite, and look, wherever you are, it's really worth getting onto Google and looking at your place in the context of the surrounding suburbs, because that can have a real, it can feed into how you might best improve biodiversity in your place. So if you look at South Perth, you can see it's only a stone's throw, say for a bird, between Kings Park and South Perth, and then down through to Jerderup, to Kensington bushland,
yeah,
across down to the river, even Canning River, the bushland that runs along there. So there's opportunities to, as you bring biodiversity back, to talk to your neighbours and maybe get them doing their verge gardens and connecting up those amazing patches of remnant bushland with your patch as well. So lots of ways that you can value add to your little patch, or even if you're looking after your local park, building up biodiversity to your park that then might link to some of these other amazing areas. So we're just going to do a quick snapshot through, because we want to get going with some building and talking about some of the stuff we have on the table in front of us. But there are a massive range of insects which still survive in the suburbs and in South Perth, in some of the remnant bushlands, and in your gardens, probably some of these you will have seen. In the wetlands, you'll find aquatic insects, and there's a huge range of those. Some of them have flying adults, so things like dragonflies will need the swamps to breed in, but then they may well fly through your garden later on. And if you have a garden pond, they may use those as well. There are fish in some of those wetlands, native fish, and a number of frogs still, Mike, in South Perth.
Still a number of frog species. Yeah, the tree frogs, especially the motorbike frog, is almost pre-adapted for garden ponds. It loves garden ponds. The other tree frog, the slender tree frog, is less common, but there are also some of the burrowing frogs. So South Perth foreshore serves populations of the moaning frog that breed each year as the water levels rise in swamps, and then they disperse through the suburbs for the rest of the year. So there's still things hanging on in that suburb.
Yeah, and if you think about it, if they're just hanging on and we provide them those little places to live, they can come back. They've got the opportunity to move back through your suburbs. And so your role is really important in helping that to happen. So there are some amazing little reptiles, aren't there?
Oh, yes. Yeah. And many of those survived in the larger areas of bush on the foreshore and in the Kensington bush.
All sorts of amazing skinks as well.
Skinks, yep.
As legless lizards.
4 or 5 skink species still survive in the most urbanized gardens, shall we say. Dwarf skinks, little fence skinks, those orange belly mulch skinks all survive, even under the roses sometimes.
And of course, some of those will,
yeah,
if you have something like a gabion structure or some of the other shelters that we provide, they'll just increase in numbers hugely in your garden.
Oh, yeah.
Lots and lots of different species of birds. We've got a great question about balancing the requirements to reduce leaf litter for fire protection, but also creating good soil by leaving leaf litter to break down. Look, it is a really challenging question. Obviously, it depends on where you are, how important it is to control that leaf litter. As Kathy was mentioning, you wouldn't be able to have a gabion structure with lots of leaves in it if you're in a high fire-prone area, but you can replace that with things like the rocks and the gravel mulches and things like that, which still provide a lot of the value for wildlife that the leaves do. Now, of course, as the questioner mentions, the leaf litter is really important for helping to build that soil structure. So breaking it up can be a way of dealing with it. So rather than having a blanket of leaf litter right the way across your property, if you have little patches separated by gravel so that there's not a continuous area that the leaves can burn, that can certainly help. And keeping it a bit moist so that the breakdown is a little bit more rapid can also help.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think breaking up the fuel load, if you like, with paths of rock or gravel, and obviously not having leaf litter right up to the house as well. So you're breaking up the fuel load if fire is an issue, which mostly in South Perth it's not so much an issue, but it's still a consideration.
Yeah, and obviously in other, if you're in a fire-prone area, these are things you need to think about. And the other thing that is quite important is to break up the link between the shrub layer and the canopy layer, so that that's not continuous, so that if you have a leaf litter area, try and avoid there being a big shrub area that can then make a sort of wick up into the canopy. So there are a lot of ways that you can manage where the fuel load is so that it doesn't sort of snowball and build on each other. So no, really, really great questions. So there are a lot of birds still in the suburbs, aren't there, Mike?
Yes, oh, absolutely. But,
obviously the weed species, the ones like the ravens and magpies that are, you know, they're adaptable, they're clever, and they work out how to use their environments. But then you have the shyer species, which require those shrub layers and connected cover, and we tend to lose those in the suburbs unless we can really cater for them. There are a few really iconic species in South Perth, aren't there, Mike? You watched them as you grew up.
Yeah, there's certainly the black cockatoos, the carnabies or white-tailed black cockatoos were a huge feature of South Perth in the 60s because of the pine plantations, and they would literally, you know, in flocks of thousands at times go past. Some wading birds, black swans, not so much in the 60s, but black swans are making a comeback, which is fantastic. And the night herons were always a favourite of mine because they were down by the river at night, and they would fly over people's gardens at night, making this strange squawking noise. And we've got a question about geckos being native. Yes, the ones in people's gardens, the marble gecko is native. There is an introduced gecko in other parts of sort of further north in WA, but the local ones are native.
Yeah, so the tech ones that you hear, say, up in Broome and in some of those northern towns are the introduced ones. But the geckos that you get in your garden, the marble geckos and the barking geckos, which some people have, they're sort of patchy, aren't they, Mike? They're all beautiful native species, which is fantastic, and also fabulous for controlling mosquitoes and other flying insects and running around on your fly screens at night. And I think the black swans, of course, have had a bit of a bonus with the extra little bit of habitat. Or
the habitat project on the South Perth foreshore, where the swans were literally lining up to go onto the island where the machines were still working at the other end. They were so keen on that island, which was fantastic. And they've actually bred there, I think twice. 2 broods now have been raised on the island.
Which is very exciting. So what can we do to improve the habitat for wildlife in South Perth and in other areas? So it is quite good to start by looking at what's there. So in this picture, you can see the little patches. Some houses have still got those big trees that Chris mentioned, so important, but so many of the houses, the big trees are gone. So anywhere that you can sneak in a large tree or protect one that's already there, because there's one thing much better than planting a new beautiful tree, and that is to protect one that's already there, particularly if it's a native tree like a marri or a banksia. That will kickstart the rest of your garden. An established tree is so important to keep if you possibly can. Now, this is the challenge for us, and that is that the block size in Perth is just plummeting. And the houses, as Chris mentioned, tend to get bigger and bigger, and the amount of available space we have left is less and less. Now, obviously, those 2 lines look like they're going to crash into each other, which I hope they don't, but it's not great. So we're not working with big areas. But I think we had a question earlier about if I'm in an apartment, can I cater for biodiversity? Yes, absolutely you can. If you've got a balcony, you can. If you've got a wall, you can grow stuff up a wall. Or if you have nothing like that, you can help at your local park. There's usually friends groups at your local wetland or your local park. And if there isn't, start one. Councils love groups of residents coming together. It's a really lovely way to get together, socialise, and also do something for biodiversity. There's usually support to help with plants or maybe a little bit of weed control to get you started. So that's absolutely worth doing. So it doesn't matter how small you have, please do it. Or as Chris has mentioned, make the house smaller and use the available space. You don't need, it's so much nicer here to have your living space outside. Why not use it? So that's, it's really nice to see that graph change a little bit. The block size, we don't want to be bulldozing Banksia woodland. So we don't want to have to keep clearing out further out from the city. So being smart on smaller blocks is fine, but just try and leave that space for us and for wildlife. Yeah. I've had my rave.
You've had your rave, yeah. I could have raved as well.
Oh, well, I don't know we've got time.
No, we haven't got both of us to rave.
So yes, we have to look where we can squeeze in that shelter. Look for those road verges. Look for the forgotten corners, and they are in every suburb. That little bit of vacant land behind the fish and chip shop. Go and talk to someone, find out who owns it. See if you could stick in a few plants. Guerrilla garden. I mean, I couldn't possibly say that we've done that, but we have. Only where it's very important and people wouldn't mind. But look, it's always possible. You can grow things in pots. We've done, well, in fact, the little honey eater that's perched on the kangaroo paw, the very first honey eater that we had in our garden was in a potted grevillea, and it was a New Holland honey eater that found our one pot with a grevillea. There was nothing but veld grass everywhere else on that plot, but it found the one flowering native and came to it. If you've got a balcony, put natives in and you'll just get so many animals that will come in, and butterflies will find.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
You can do things like woody meadows. So some councils are trialing native plants that they can actually crop so that they can look neat and tidy, but they're still providing that habitat for native wildlife. You can espalier native plants, like you can espalier fruit and veggies. So lots of ways to sneak things in. I love it. It's actually worth Googling green walls and green roofs and just see what comes up. This one is the Chicago City Hall, and they have an amazing green roof, which is just planted with the native wildflowers that would have lived in that area before Chicago was built. And so you can walk around or look from all those surrounding buildings at this beautiful green meadow. And that's just on the top of a building. Now, obviously, there's a little bit of tech that's required to make that work, but the technology is there now. So we could be doing this. We could green our whole city. And why wouldn't you? There's just so many plants. I mean, there's just a little snapshot. There's so many extraordinary local plants.
The elegance of the plants and the elegance of, especially the insects, is just remarkable. The colours of things like peacock spiders and crusader bugs and even jewel beetles and some of the native bees are actually animals of great beauty that can get into your garden.
Yeah. And as Chris mentioned, small blocks can provide food and shelter for rare species like black cockatoos. If you put a banksia or a hakea on your verge, you'll be providing habitat for cockatoos. And if everybody did that, if everybody put 1 or 2 cockatoo food plants, we would save that species, because there would be so much food for them in our suburbs that they would be able to pick up where they left off those 50 years ago.
In fact, the house across the road from us now has a banksia ashbei as a verge shrub. It's only a shrub, and this morning the Carnaby's cockatoos found it and were destroying its seed cones.
Which is in itself is beautiful.
Which they do each
year. Watch. So there are a few principles, I guess, that are great, and one is to plant local where possible. And as Chris mentioned earlier, there are specific plants that are also great, things like Cape lilacs that will native species will adapt to use. So you don't have to be 100%. Look, if you want to have fruit and veggies, we do. And if your grandmother gave you a particular plant that you're really fond of, that's fine. You don't have to be a purist about it, but just as much as you can, sneak in some of these local natives, because they really will help support biodiversity, particularly the insects recognize them, so they tend to find them. Try and have the leaf litter where you can, if it's safe. Right, now there's a good fun question. We've just had the question of which natives would we recommend for espalier. I'm a great fan of experimenting, actually, because I think it's quite new. So it's the sort of thing where you can try. I suspect you could espalier things like wattles, in fact, because they're quite flexible. Some of the small eucalypts you could definitely do. I would definitely try them.
Silver Princess, I've seen espalier.
Oh, thanks, Chris. Chris says Silver Princess. So that beautiful.
We happen to have an example here.
Yes, we just happen to have. And when we the most beautiful plant, and any of those flexible eucalypts that have flexible young foliage, I think you could probably do a great job. But look, give it a go and send us a photo of what you've done. If you've already tried one, it's the sort of stuff we should share, because that knowledge, we're still learning. So the more that we all experiment, the more flexible we can be with our garden designs and still use native species. So I think it would be fabulous to see what people come up with. So we've mentioned leaf litter and fallen timber. And I know that if you're dealing with fire-prone areas, these are things you do have to limit. So as Kathy was saying, those burnt logs can be a nice way of sort of still having some logs, but still protecting from fire. It's really, really important to support pollinators and things like, well, obviously birds, butterflies, bees, beetles, flies. In fact, a lot of species of flies are actually also important pollinators. Lots of ways that we can do that. Caterpillars, there are specific plants that we can plant for caterpillars, things like scaevolas, divesias, a lot of those little native peas are really good for them. Your local native nurseries, particularly some of the community nurseries like a Pace, will help you with species for those. We've got lists of species that help. Lots of ways that you can help small insects. This is a lovely story. This is a admiral butterfly. It grows on a little weedy species, very limited in the plants that the caterpillars feed on. There's a program growing pelletry, which is this species, which is, you can't buy it in shops, but it's handed on, the seeds are grown and handed on each year. And that helps to keep admiral butterflies, which are a stunning little butterfly, in our suburbs. So the more that we grow plants for butterflies, and you can grow this little plant just in a pot, the more we can support those important pollinators. Native bees. So we talked a little bit about that. Kathy was mentioning the canes. Native bees don't nest in hives, but they nest in holes. So either in wood or in the ground. And some of them are leafcutter bees, and you get these little semicircles out of your leaves. One of those really exciting things you can find in your garden is little semicircles cut out. And it's a bit hard to see, but the photo on the right-hand side of your screen actually has the rear end of a bee, that little orange bottomed bee, with a little bit of leaf folded up, and it's flying into its hole. So it's cut that leaf. In fact, that was the leaf that had cut in the photo on the left, and it had folded it up and it was flying into the hole. So what they do then in their hole is they lay an egg on it, seal it over, and then the young bee develops on top of the food that it's given it. So extraordinary, but these are very important pollinators for native plants, but also for some of your veggies and things as well. Some of them are really good pollinators. This is one of the prostrate banksias, which the native bees have had a little bit of a nibble at too. They quite like. So native bees are really easy to accommodate in your garden if you plant the right species, and you can come up with some clever and really quite beautiful ways of incorporating holes for them in the garden. Once again, creating an old tree, basically recreating an old tree. So the picture in the middle is a natural bee hotel. That's basically a huge, big, dead marry. It's full of holes, and that is what native bees use naturally. And so around it are a couple of artificial insect hotels. And here's some really innovative ones. So the big discs, that's actually in Holland Park in England. So that's an art piece, which is also an insect hotel. The little house on the left is actually from Graz in Austria. So native bees occur all around the world, different species to ours, but you can cater for them by giving them structure. And we'll have a better look at these now. Well, we can do that. I guess we could jump out of this just for a minute, maybe we'll come back. I think Chris is giving you a bit of a close up there at the moment, and we'll finish off this, and then we can. Then we'll do a demo one. We'll make up a demo. Lots of other ways of providing shelter. So crevices. So your gabion structure or even logs and branches can have little crevices for skink. Actually, the little skink you can see on the right hand side is he's been hiding in that crevice, and he's just grabbed the most enormous moth that he then spent about the next 10 minutes trying to swallow. But it's just a nice little demonstration. He was quite safe, but also provided him somewhere to hunt.
And that piece of wood he's living in is actually a rescued sort of log from a pile of rubbish that was going to get burnt on, or going to get thrown out with a verge collection. Just a nice old gnarly bit of branch, a few meters long, that we rescued and stuck in our garden, and the skinks moved into it within days.
And so a bit like, well, as Kathy had coming out of the top of her gabion structure,
sort of
though you could have a lovely twisty branch which will provide habitat for small skinks like the little fence skinks. Nest boxes for birds, and that's a pardalote on a pardalote nest box, and we've actually brought one of those in. So we'll show you that later. Lots of different nest boxes for different species, and there's different designs that are available. You can find those on the web, or we can provide you with more designs for those. Bat boxes are great.
Bat boxes are great.
Yes. Because microbats eat huge numbers of mosquitoes. So they're always fun to put up in the garden too. And they will use them. We do still have a number of native bat species in the suburbs, and they're a really important species to keep here as much as we can.
And they're an extraordinary thing to be able to watch in the evening, especially with children, to watch bats drop out of a bat box and fly off sort of towards the setting sun, literally. Is quite a remarkable experience to be able to have.
Yeah. And here's some gabion structures with the gravel and recycled material, which Chris talked about. So more of the wall structure and less of the art piece. These ones have got things like Banksia cones tucked into them as well. We've done them with insect hotels mounted inside, and that works really well too, using things like the old terracotta pipes. So many ways you can use them. These are bunkers. So we were talking about making habitat for things like bobtails and quenda. So if you were lucky enough to have quenda in your patch, but of course you can make structures out of wood and things. But if you're in a fire-prone area, as we were talking about earlier, that is a risk, because any sort of wooden structure that you make is going to burn. So if you can make it out of materials like bricks and tiles, then you are potentially protecting some of those animals and giving them a bolt hole for right after the fire, so that you are protecting them beyond the fire, because otherwise they're just predators. Aren't they?
And the ones in the image there aren't especially attractive as they stand, but they can be, hidden with branches and sand, but they give that sort of fireproof sort of shelter for the animals.
Or you can paint them up and have fun with them.
Oh, yes.
Yes, in the UK, they have hedgehog highways, and you can paint little signs on with hedgehogs. I mean, it doesn't matter what you do. It's your garden. You can do whatever you want.
Yes.
So we have talked about water. Water is really important in the garden. And as Chris mentioned, the more places you can provide water for birds, big bowls for the larger birds and little tiny bowls tucked away for the smaller birds, and for things like lizards. Good idea. Good idea to put a rock in the middle, particularly if it's a larger bowl, because you don't want things like lizards drowning in them. And you can attract all sorts of different species. And, sometimes there's species you don't expect, like our dog, who now drinks out of ours. Good demonstration, though, that having it high enough so things like cats can't get in there is quite important. Ponds are good too, if you can, if it's safe. It's a great way to put another source of water into the environment. And once again, you can buy something and be very expensive, or you can use an old bath off the verge and it costs you nothing. And it's still great habitat for frogs, isn't it?
Yeah, the frogs, and of course the birds will drink out of ponds like that. Lizards will come and drink, and a whole range of insects. And it also gives you a little green patch of extra plants that need that extra water. So you've got a bit of more of a variety of plant life in the garden with those water-dependent plants.
And I have to sneak this photo.
You have to sneak that photograph in. Yes.
So this is in fact a repurposed swimming pool. It was in my parents' garden and they weren't using it anymore. So we converted it into wildlife habitat, and that is a real night heron that turned up in their garden. So their pool is now a frog pond, has lots and lots of tadpoles every year. It's full of pygmy perch, so the mosquito larvae don't breed. There are no mosquitoes. And the night heron thought there was so much food there, he moved in. So it just shows you. Now in front, you can see there's a couple of pots. Some of the pots that are floating there have edible food plants in, because it's quite a nice way to grow things like watercress and some of those species which are easy to harvest and also good in summer because you don't have to water them. But yeah, they're quite a nice, neat way of providing islands if you're reusing a swimming pool for something else. Just a few other things to consider. Oh, and there they are.
Oh.
There they go.
Yeah, pesticides and chemicals, if you can avoid them at all, if at all possible, it's much the best way to go. The rodenticides end up giving secondary poison to birds of prey and owls and such like. So you want to avoid those. And yes, the drains, thank you.
Yeah, so the other thing is that all those chemicals that we use, things like flea rinses and those sorts of chemicals, really, really important to keep them out of roadside drains because they don't get filtered in any sort of way. So any of those chemicals that go onto our roads, or say you see people backwash their pools down into those drains, that water's not filtered at all. So all those pool chemicals, that chlorine and things, are going straight into the nearest wetland. So really, really important to avoid doing irresponsible things with chemicals. Now, Chris did mention about cats. This is a horrible photo. I'm sorry that we're showing you this. This was a cat that was killed on the road. And all those little things along in front of it are the lizards that it ate in the last evening's hunting. Because cats' digestion goes quite quickly. So yes, they would have all disappeared by the next year. That shows you the next day. So yeah, that is a huge number of lizards. Although cats catch birds, they actually catch so many more lizards. And of course, at night, if your cat's out at night, the lizards are asleep in the leaf litter. So they're not even going to run away. So the cats just pick them off one by one.
I'm afraid they do, yeah.
It's very sad. So I'm sorry, I apologise.
Indoor pets, cats.
Yeah, yes, great as indoor pets. Really important, when you're doing fencing, it's really great if you can leave gaps in your fences. The old picket fences were really good for small animals because they could slip through. Things like bobtails and frogs could slip through between the fences. But with solid walls, it's often really hard for things to get through. So gaps in fences, fantastic. If you can talk to your council, sloping or flush curbing, really important, because things like frogs, ducklings, little baby turtles, they just can't get up curbs. So those sorts of things, work with your council, work with your neighbours to see if you can improve the permeability of the suburb for wildlife. And then think about those corridors, that's really important. Look at those forgotten corners and the private land around you. Going back to South Perth, look at where you are. If you're not in South Perth, Google your suburb and see where you could make a friend down the road and see if you can improve that corridor.
Many animals actually need to be able to move across the landscape for part of their life cycle. Some of the frogs do. A lot of the birds, honey eaters, don't live in one garden all the time. They move from garden to garden. They might move from 100 kilometres away into Perth to coincide with a flowering or something, and then go 100 kilometres to the north and come back again 6 months later. By moving through the gardens that are more or less provide continuous habitat, they have more of a chance to move through rather than having just sort of bare areas of whole suburbs that they can't navigate.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess it's really, we see that really important shift in the way people think. So it's a matter of reimagining what's beautiful in your garden or your park, and looking at the native species as being a really valuable and important part of that, and performing a really important function within that landscape. And because of urban infill, that's even more important, because city people really desperately need that connection with nature. So the more that we can feed it in, the better. It's healthier for us. If we fill all those little forgotten corners, then we can make a healthier habitat and build more of those connections. So that's really the presentation bit. So now we can get on to doing some fun stuff with all the stuff on the table.
Yes. Yeah.
So if we can just switch over to that, and we'll talk about what we've brought along here and do a bit of a demo, I think. So some of these things are things that you will have seen in the presentation. So things like these old ridge caps, which cost us, what was it, Mike? $1?
About $1 each.
Yeah, at the salvage yard. But of course, if you've got bobtails in your garden, or other small lizards, or even frogs, they love things like this. They're nice and heavy. So they're difficult for cats to move. So you can just pop those in your garden. And if you like the look of them, great. And if you don't, just tuck them underneath a bush and you're going to be providing habitat. The other thing we found with these, which are really great, is that they warm up. And so lizards quite like sitting on top of them. We've had bobtails sitting on top, sunning themselves. So they're really, really great. Oh, this one's quite good too, mate.
That's just the top of where ridge lines meet.
Yeah, so this one's particularly good. One of the things about, certainly with Quenda, they've had problems with just having single pipes buried. Animals like foxes are pretty clever, and they work out that the animal always comes in and out through the one exit. And so something like this, where there's several exits, is quite a good idea, because a predator doesn't really know which way an animal's going to sneak out. So making a complex environment's quite good, because little animals can slip in and out in an unpredictable way, and that helps to protect them. Now, we did mention in the presentation that there's species that you can plant that help different animals. So things like scabolas, and there are lots of different species of those, are really good for insects, lots of different insects, butterflies, a lot of different butterflies like scabolas, but lots of insects, native bees as well. This is Acacia lasiacarpa, or panjang. That's a lovely local native small wattle that's quite common in nurseries, and that's a really good plant to put in if you've got a small garden, but really, really good for invertebrates as well. That's hemiandra. It's nice and spiky, so not good for things like predatory cats, but very good for little animals that hide underneath, those prickly plants that Chris mentioned.
Forms a spiky mat so lizards can get under the mat and predators can't get to them. And that's a slender banksia, which is one of our sort of 2 or 3 key banksia species around Perth. When it flowers, long orange blossoms, or orangey yellow blossoms, sorry. Well, there's an example.
Yes, that's one of the cones. Now, this one, actually quite an interesting cone, this one, because this one has been bitten. It would have been much longer than this, bitten open by a black cockatoo. So the black cockatoo's just ripped it open. And if you look inside, you can see why. Because there's a little channel. See that channel going inside there? That is where a borer beetle larva has been feeding on the inside of the banksia cone. And those beetle larvae are very full of protein and really nutritious for black cockatoos, particularly before the breeding season. The females need to build up a bit of condition so that they can lay eggs. So they look for these beetle larvae, which are really good for them. And of course, it's also helping the plant, because it's removing a species that's feeding on the banksia and sort of helping the banksia as well. So it's a bit of a win-win. So if next time you're walking through a patch of bushland where there's banksias, just have a look and see if there's any of these that have been bitten open by the black cockatoos. And actually, while we're on that,
more
yes, have a look and see if any of them have been munching on the marry nuts, because you can see this one's a red tail that's had a really good munch on this piece of marry and ripped it open. So you can see those black cockatoos sneaking into the suburbs and feeding. And oh yes, and speaking of black cockatoos, I think this may have been the hakea that Chris was talking about, that his black cockatoos feed on. There are a few different hakea species that they really love, and they're beautiful low shrub, but also really valuable for black cockatoos. We talked about the nest boxes, Mike.
Right, yes. And here we have this is the pardalote nest box. The pardalotes are little tiny birds that feed on insects that live on the leaves of eucalypts. So you tend to only get pardalotes where there are eucalypts, and they nest in small hollows naturally, but it takes 50 years or a century to get hollows even that big in a natural tree. So you can accelerate the process by producing something like this. And the pardalotes, take the lid off. Pardalotes actually do put nesting material in their hollow. So they pack it full of leaves and grass. Towards the light, yep. And so the eggs and the chicks have a nice comfortable nest to sit on while the parents come in and out and feed them. We have 3 of these up in our garden, and they all produce babies almost non-stop about 6 months of the year.
amazing. So pardalotes really like eucalypts. So if you have a garden with eucalypts or a park, you're right next to a park that has gum trees in it, then pardalote nest boxes are really popular, and they're not a problem for bees because they're too small for bees. So you don't get the introduced honeybees using them, but they are really great for little native pardalotes. And the pardalotes feed on the insects, the lerps that live on the leaves of the eucalypt. So you can hear them sort of cracking them off as they hop through the branches. So it's good for the eucalypt as well, because it's helping to control a pest insect on the eucalypt.
Sorry?
Okay, so, and we did have, yes, this lovely Dianella, which, as Chris says, needs a really good chop before anything gets done with it, either split or certainly needs those roots taken off. But Dianella, great for native bees like the blue-banded bees, because the little blue flowers are very popular with them. So really tough as nails plants, but really great for native insects.
Good sort of grassy structured plant for hard spots.
So yes, things like Banksia cones, certainly really great habitat, beautiful looking things, and you can pop them into your gabion walls. These are the Banksia grandis, so the
bull Banksia.
The bull Banksia, the largest of our Banksia species, and these ones are Banksia menzesii, or the Menzies Banksia, or firewood Banksia. Also the one that May Gibbs' little Banksia men were based on. You can see the faces there.
Cultural history there for you.
You can see these ones have still got the seeds inside. These ones have opened up and dropped the seed. So we should probably make an insect hotel, Mike, or two. So insect hotels, we showed you some pictures of some of the artwork that you can use. You can be really basic. So the most basic insect hotel you can make is really a bamboo bundle, which is just these are actually giant reeds. So they're a weed species, but you can find them, sometimes they'll be on sort of rough land, and you can just talk to the council or whoever it is who owns the land and ask if you can cut some, or you can buy bamboo stakes from your local shop. And the most basic thing you can do is just get a bit of string, tie them up, and hang them up, and there are some bee species that will use those. It's good to tie them into a corner so they don't swing, because the bees like them to stay in one place. So that's a really basic way of making it. And there are some species that would use that. But if you want to be a bit more innovative than that, you can do a lot of things with recycled materials. These are made out of old tins. You can paint them up if you want to. Kids quite like to make them and paint them up. Pack them full of bits and pieces, and then you're providing habitat for lots and lots of different species. Now this one, you can see it's a bit loose. We've got some bits of cane that have been put in, and different range of sizes, because it's good to have different species need different sizes. And then we've got a few bits of interesting twig and log, because things like spiders and other animals will also use them. Even things like fence skinks will. Okay,
that's a
very good question from somebody. Where do we get these materials without raiding bushland? Okay, so all of the materials that we have here, some of them are from our garden because we have a bushland garden. Often councils will be doing cleanups in areas, so you can access a lot of things from verge collection. These Caesia, so the Silver Princess branches, were from a branch that fell off our garden. You can often find those in verge collections. These big old Banksia grandis leaves, same thing. They were in one that fell on the side of a road and was going to get tidied up. A lot of it is a matter of keeping an eye out, isn't it?
It
Mike?
is, yeah. And this Banksia cone, that's Banksia integrifolia, that's just grown in our garden. So you can plant the plants that produce the cones.
So this one's actually an Eastern States Banksia, so not a local Banksia. So with things like that, you do need to watch a little bit. This one has the seeds have all been lost. So obviously you'd be careful in controlling where those seeds might go, because we wouldn't want that species coming into bushland. So if you were near to a bushland area, you would make sure that the seeds didn't get lost. Other things you can use, these are just an old bit of garden stake that has been drilled with different sizes of drill bits, drilled nice and deep, so that the native bees would use the whole length. And 4 and 7 millimeters are particularly good diameters for our native bees, but anything between about 3 and 12 millimeters will be used by some species of native bees. But the really interesting thing is, in these long holes that go right down, they make a series of cells up through the holes, and they lay an egg, pack it, lay an egg, seal it over, pack it, lay an egg, seal it over, up all the way up. So if there's a nice deep hole, then the bees that develop at the back tend to be females, and the bees that develop at the front tend to be males. So the males hatch out earlier so that they're around for when the females emerge, so that then they can mate, and they are much more successful at breeding because of that. It also means occasionally you get parasites, parasitic wasps that come and parasitize the bee holes. But of course, they tend to just parasitize the first couple. So if there's a long hole, the females at the back, which of course are the most important for breeding, are protected, and it's only the males that tend to get predated, and you usually get 1 or 2 males that still survive. So quite good to have a nice long hole. So get a nice long drill bit and drill it through. Well, that's a nice one.
Just
too,
another example of the same thing with a natural piece of peppermint prune from our garden, I think it was.
Yes, it was.
Just drill the holes in there and stick it back out.
Yeah.
You could even tie it back into the peppermint with the holes in there.
Yeah. So anywhere that you can sneak holes, and garden furniture is another place that you can sneak holes in. So, you know, just drill holes in your garden furniture. That's fine. I don't see a problem with that. The other thing we sometimes use for insect hotels is old pots. And this is quite a useful one. You can see we've kind of glued it together because it was a bit broken. So you put them on their side because the holes tend to be used best on their sides. So what are we going to put in this one, Mike? What do you think?
Oh, a selection of canes, of course.
Yeah. So what have we got? Do you want to start?
Want to try that lump of clay?
Oh, yes. Oh, we didn't talk about clay, actually.
No, that was something done by at one of our workshops. I think a child decided to make a lump of clay with holes in it, which is perfect for some of the bees that like an earthen type hole rather than a woody hole.
And you do find there are parasitic wasps, which are a native wasp species as well, that sometimes use the clay to help seal up their holes. So if you ever have a little brown coloured hole in your insect hotel, it'll mean that you've got a parasitic wasp in there, which is a good thing. That's they catch, you know, they're beneficial because they catch caterpillars and things like that. So just make sure as you do the canes, just check that they're open. So you can see this one is sealed over right there. So just turn it around, and if it's sealed both ends, then just get a pin or something and just poke it through, open it up so that there's space for them to use it. If it's rough, you can also use a bit of sandpaper and just smooth off the ends. This is high quality living. So
yeah, that's
that's next level for
next level.
Yeah. Oh, now I've lost our bee thing here. Here we go.
Don't have to put that in.
Our nice little bit of clay. There we go. So we'll put those in. So we're going to stack lots and lots of different canes in of different sizes. There we go. And it is a great thing to do with kids. Yes, so maybe one of these bits of wood. And we'll put a square one with some of the small ones. Oh, we got another question. Great.
Oh, regarding whether the bee hotels should be in the sun or out of the sun, and whether they should or get wet or not get wet.
Yes, it is. It's a challenging one, that one. Once again, it's really interesting to experiment. We find they really do like things like the terracotta pots, which there's a little bit of temperature insulation, I guess, because so it sort of stays warm, doesn't get too cold, doesn't get too wet. They are sheltered but not too cold area is what we find. They don't like to be too close to the house under a deep veranda, so they do like to get a little bit of warmth and a little bit of sun. But obviously baking sun, say with the tins.
I was saying the tin cans in full sun would be cooked. But that in deep shade will be fine. So it's a matter of thinking about the materials and the location so that they don't get too hot and you wouldn't want to have them in a position where the sprinklers sprayed right into them or something like that.
But these ones we find particularly popular. The other thing that you can do, some pots you can actually make a little shade that sits over the top. So you might do that out of bark or out of wood. Some pots have a sort of flange at the back. We find those ones that you hang up are quite good because you can use that, and that makes the sort of natural shade, which just protects them. Yeah, a little veranda, I guess, that protects them. So we could use one of those Banksia cones, tuck that in. Maybe, should we stick in some gum nuts?
Yeah.
It's quite fun to use some really interesting materials, a bit like Kathy was doing to give it a bit more decorative.
A bit more structure and interest, yeah.
There we go. And another thing that's you can use is bits of cardboard. So egg cartons are quite good because they don't tend to have dyes or other things that could be a problem.
For like play school now.
I do. Yeah, this is my play school moment. So just going to cut that.
Yeah,
there we go. You didn't see me ripping that, did you? Anyway, the insects don't care. So it's quite good to have a piece of card when you've got nearly to this stage where it's pretty firm, but there's still a bit of movement. A piece of card that you fold like this is quite useful because you can use that to lock it in. So I'll just see how we're going. See if it's fairly firm.
How's that going?
Yeah, we're getting there. Oh, no, we've still need a bit more in there. Oh, dear. There we go. This is just a bottomless pit, this. There we go. Oh, we're getting there. Goodness, it's quite a large pot. There's going to be a lot of space for little insects in this pot. Okay, so yeah, I think we're nearly there. Okay, so when we've done that, if you just use your card, and you can also use a little sort of forked stick for this as well, just fold it in and then you just slide it in. Now I'm not going to get it in.
Yeah.
Slide it in and then just let it go, and it sort of springs out and it just locks it in. You can also use a forked twig and just push it in and just let go, and that just braces it and helps to hold it in. So we'd fiddle with that a little bit just to get that one in a bit further. But you can see that's now got lots and lots of places for things to hide. And if we just pop that in the garden, it's getting a little bit late now, but by spring, we might not get anything now until spring, except for things like lizards, which of course we'll use them straight away. And some other little small invertebrates. For the bees, we'd be expecting them in spring. So, and we didn't even use things like these amazing Banksia leaves. That was something for Kathy's Kathy's structure. So yeah, lots and lots of ways, and the ways of doing these are endless. Depending on what materials you have, you can create an amazing decorative art piece, or just a functional piece of habitat that things will use. And lots of materials, things like bark. If you've got old bits of bark, that's really great. Things will hide into that, just making endless little spots. Everything from lizards to spiders to all sorts of tiny little creatures will hide in stuff like this. Things like praying mantises need places for their eggs as well. Little things like that you might not think about. Just by providing those structures, there's more and more places for those layers of creatures to find spots in your garden. So look, there's so many. I guess we probably need to leave some time for questions, don't we, Chris? But no, that's okay, because Chris is just grabbing a bite. That's a really good idea. So I guess if we think about those really important principles of providing structure in a way that suits you in your garden, it can be a formal way, or it can be just like a patch of bush. Our garden is mostly like a patch of bush, and that's what suits us. But we have seen some amazing native gardens done with structure. So using those sorts of native plants that have either been selected to be a bit tamed or just pruned and made neat, but but instead of the Buxus hedge, you've got something which has a biodiversity contribution as well. Okay, this is a very good question. Are bee hotels best on the ground or in trees? Okay, on the ground, you tend to find they become ant hotels. So generally,
if you like ants, it's fine.
Yeah, which is, look, I mean, it's still structure, but generally speaking, 1 metre off the ground is a good idea. And I mean, in the wild, they'll use, if you look at a big old tree in a bushland, you'll see, I have seen a huge one up at Joondalup, a big old stag full of holes from borers. And the bees were using 3, 4, 5 metres up this tree. But generally, a minimum of 1 metre off the ground is a good idea.
Good,
yeah. And having it somewhere where there's not easy access. So you wouldn't put it next to an ant's nest just because the ants would use it because it's structure. But if you want things for bees, then 1 metre off the ground and somewhere firm. So they don't, it's best not to suspend it, because if you hang it, then the bee hotel tends to swing. So say with this one here, if we hung this one up, it might swing back and forth like that. And bees are quite specific about their holes. If you think about it, in the wild, they'll be on the side of a tree and that tree won't swing. So they always navigate back and forth to their hole. If it's swinging and this is their hole, they come back and it might be in a different place and then they get confused. So it's a good idea, say, to put this in a fork of a tree or tie it firmly so that it doesn't confuse them. And other animals as well find it easier. Things like lizards will pop in and out more easily if it's sitting. You can put them on walls as well, if you've got a nice firm wall, or you can screw them on, bolt them. This one, in fact, has a hole in the back, so you could drill and put a line on the wall. If you think back to that picture of Holland Park of the big discs on the wall, they were just put onto the side of a building. So you can do that as well. Yeah, no, really. Yes, please send your questions through. We'd love to answer as many questions as possible. And I just can't wait to see what people do. Actually, also send in any photos of habitat that you found really works well. If you've had particular success with a particular plant or a particular design of fauna shelter, then that's always really interesting to find out about as well. And with places like South Perth, there's no reason why in a few years, if everybody adds those sort of layers of habitat, things like Quenda could even be reintroduced into our suburbs. Lots of lizards are species that could find their way back in if we only provided them with the methods for moving through. Things like the frogs you were mentioning.
Still there, yep. And blue wrens are in parts of down along the Canning River, and there's a recent record of blue wrens along the Milieu foreshore between the freeway and the river, believe it or not. So they're technically in South Perth. There's no reason why blue wrens couldn't colonise people's gardens if there were shrubs, if they were interconnected between gardens and provide the sort of habitat that blue wrens need, and if the cats are kept in at night, of course, because wrens and cats are not a good combination.
No. And another species which is in South Perth still in the bushland areas is the bearded dragon. And bearded dragons would be right through people's gardens if they had native gardens, if they kept their cats inside. But they're very prone to cats because they go to sleep on branches at night. And of course, if they're asleep and the cat's out at night, they just pick them off. And so we had a bearded dragon which moved into our garden. It was there for about a week. And in those days, we had a cat from down the road that used to come into our garden, and it disappeared, unfortunately, within a week. It didn't survive. But imagine if we all had bearded dragons in our garden. What a beautiful experience to watch them. And they're quite engaging because they watch you. So it's it'd be a really wonderful thing to have in South Perth or in wherever your patch is. Lots of other ways to make habitat with recycled stuff. Pots are good. These are little old secondhand pots that we use from plants that were planted in bushland areas. It's quite a good idea to just seal over the back so those holes are a bit sealed, either with a bit of clay or a little piece of wood, and then pop the materials inside. You can even paint these. We've done that with kids. So they're a great design activity actually with students, if you're a teacher, because we're still finding out. You can experiment with them and see what uses them, whether it's bees or other animals, lots and lots of different designs that you can come up with, and we'd love to see them. And the other thing that the circular structure that Kathy had, you can fill those sorts of things with materials that, say, birds might use. So nesting materials are quite often in short supply in the suburbs. So things like little bits of pet hair or bits of fibre from plants. Some of this, in fact, some of the materials that Kathy had are just the sorts of things that birds might use in their nests. So that's something else that you can help to provide for wildlife that helps them. Okay. Oh, okay. This is a great question. Which plants attract the blue wrens in particular, and which nesting boxes are suited to them? Mike, you can answer that one.
Okay. Well, the blue wrens go for shrubs that are sort of a metre and a half high, that are quite dense and somewhat patchy. So they can be in one dense shrub, then fly 4 or 5 metres to the next dense shrub. We're not to say shrubs, native shrubs, because native shrubs will have the insects in them that the blue wrens eat. Acacias, grevilleas, hakea, thryptomines, those sorts of shrubs, very dense, prickly if possible, and in little groups, so you've got patches of thicket. And wrens make their own nests. They make a nest with a side entrance, so it's sort of the size of a squeezed up softball, sort of taller than they are wide, and with a hole in the side, often in very dense vegetation, so they're hard to see. But
yeah. So providing some of those twigs and small little bits of bark and leaf are the sorts of things that will help wrens in the suburbs. They'll help to attract them into your garden. And I think the other thing is linkage, Mike, isn't it?
Yeah, the linkage, the connectivity. Yeah.
So if you're near to a natural area, then you're more likely to be able to get wrens back into your garden. But if you're not, talk to your neighbours, talk to the people down your street. If you could get some connectivity along those road verges, there's no reason at all why you couldn't get wrens in your suburb. So yeah, that's a challenge for you. We'd love to hear if you can get those wrens back. We have a couple of times, twice we've had them in our garden, and we're about 100 metres from a reserve, but we have now got a few neighbours who've just started to pick up on putting
shrubs,
some native shrubs, and that's the difference, that all of a sudden they've got those little stepping stones of vegetation to make their way up.
Yeah.
And people are becoming better at keeping their cats in. I think that you are noticing people are, because it's safer for the cats. It's not just safer for wildlife. It's actually the average survival of cats that are kept inside is several years longer, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And if you're so inclined, keep records. If you see a wren in the garden or a New Holland honeyeater, make a note of it and see how long it is until the next one comes along. You might start to see them more and more often. That's certainly what we've done. Someone's been rescuing drowning bees in their swimming pool. What can I do about putting sources of water into the pool to stop them from drowning?
So, okay, that's a really good question. So yes, providing an alternative solution is good. So bowls, little shallow bowls with things like marbles or pebbles or stones in them are really good for bees, because, and other small animals, because they then don't drown. So providing an alternative is probably the best solution. You're not going to lose, you're still going to get the odd bee, but if they've got a safe place away from the pool, then they're more likely to use that. So yes, and butterflies also would use it. In fact, brightly coloured marbles work quite well because they're attractive to them. They come in and then they find the water. That's probably your best bet, I think. Interesting question, but yeah, I'd try that, because it is really annoying, isn't it? It's sad because you're losing animals, but also, of course, if you're walking around your pool in bare feet, that's not a good idea either. So yes, try that. Try some dishes away. So very excited to hear what people start getting.
Absolutely.
Be really interesting if people have particular species that they have seen in their gardens that they've been surprised about, or if they've seen them feeding on anything in particular. That would be really interesting to know too.
Yeah. And certainly when I was a child in South Perth, we never saw bobtails in people's gardens, whereas in some other suburbs you did. I don't know whether that is still the case, whether bobtails are still absent from South Perth or whether there are some bobtails that are living in people's gardens. That'd be quite fun to know.
Yes, let us know. Send us a message and tell us if you've got bobtails in your garden.
I have a very soft spot for bobtails.
Yes, and I mean, even things like the goannas, the monitors pop into people's gardens occasionally in some suburbs. So, and would they still be in Jeddah?
Never saw them when I was looking around in the 70s.
So probably still not there now. Okay. Oh, now there's an interesting question. Why do bees like to drink from seedling pots, particularly after adding manure tea? Now, that we would be guessing. That's a really interesting question. It's probably to do, we need a bee expert here, a honeybee expert. It's probably to do with the nutrients that are in that tea, because, of course, like bees drink nectar from flowers, they're probably picking up minerals and nutrients in that liquid, which is particularly valuable for them. But once again, if you've kept bees and you know the answer to that, we'd love to know.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll certainly be talking
we need an apiarist.
Yes, apiarist friends, and see if they've got an answer to that one. But yes, certainly there's particular liquids that are particularly attractive to insects, and those nectar sources are really important. So I don't know whether we want to do any general questions or general wrap up, Chris.
Well, I'll come in and I'll try and speak with a booming voice. Hopefully everyone can hear me.
We'll snuggle up.
You can snuggle up, that's right. I'll lean into your chest. So hopefully you can all see why we are so privileged to have Mike and Mandy involved. They have so much knowledge and extraordinary experience to add to this. So if you were to say to people, what are your three, I'm putting you on the spot here, but what are your three major things that people can do right away this planting season to bring biodiversity to their gardens?
Look, local natives.
Local natives,
That'd have to be a first one. Add some structure in whatever way you want to do that. If it's a Kathy, beautiful art piece, or just, find some bits from the salvage yard. So structure, native plants. Do you think talk to your neighbours?
Oh, I was going to say dig up your lawn, but
well, particularly the artificial lawn. We hope you haven't got that, but if you have, quick, it's even disposing of it's difficult. It's death basically. So yes, if you have artificial lawn, remove it. If you have ordinary lawn, just the bits you need,
a bit less,
reduce it.
And certainly start with the verge. So there's really no reason why we need verge lawn. And I often say to people, we're just so lucky that we are in a really wealthy part of the world where we could afford, and we're at a time when desalination technology was at such a scale of development that we could literally buy our way out of running out of water. But we haven't solved the problem. We just put a band-aid on it and we bought some time. We all need to learn to do better with less. So we've got two amazing extra workshops coming up, which Lexi's going to give us the dates again. We'd love to see you at those events, and really to reiterate that putting biodiversity back into our suburbs is just the most precious thing that we can do. And I remind people that when we get tourists back again, when they come back, we are one of the most popular destinations in the world, and they do not come to see our suburbs. They do not come to see our shiny big office towers or our football teams. They come to see the incredible wildlife. That's what we're famous for. And yet when you drive into most suburbs still, and your beautiful slide showed that, you very quickly go from the fecundity and just the ecotopia of somewhere like Kings Park into the banality of the suburbs. And it does not have to be that way. And I remind people as well, we had the old adage that native gardens and biodiverse gardens were scrappy and messy, but so much has changed. And the work of mercenary men and women to breed, select smaller, beautiful plants that will fit and will bring your garden to life. It's just mind-blowing.
Oh, that's it. And it's like nowhere else in the world. We have the biodiversity here is like nowhere else. And I think sometimes we have to remind ourselves quite how special it is.
And I'm going to say a big I'm going to pull on every string that I can to get people to change the way they garden. And if you don't care about it for you, then think about it for your kids, the grandkids, any of the next generation that you love. The greatest gift we can give them is a love and connection to nature. Look at how important it has been and how you have been shaped. And we now know there's so much research that shows that kids that are deprived of nature are deprived, full stop. It impairs their cognitive and their physiological development. It retards children to not have connection to nature. And I say that with every piece of emotive language that I can. So if you're building a big house with artificial turf, you really need to think about the fact you are depriving your children of something that's critically important to their growth and development. And when things are tough in their life, nature and that innate understanding that nature can recalibrate, can help them rebalance, that's the greatest gift you can give them. And there's so much that we can bring to those landscapes. So hopefully you're getting the message that we're passionate about it. We're moving into the growing season now. So May is usually such a wonderful time to dig and to plant and get those plants in. And just remind people why it's important to plant, because a lot of, particularly people coming from the Northern Hemisphere, they say, no, we plant in spring. Why do we plant at the beginning of winter in this part of the world?
Oh, no, really, really important, because now's our growing season, because the roots can get down really quickly. And by the hot, dry season, those plants have got their roots down, they've got some protection and they're established. So doing it now is just such a joy. And you just see them rocket, don't you? It's so exciting.
It is. And even that little bit of rain that we had, you could see the plants were just so relieved by that break. Because we had 4 months without rain.
That's right.
It was brutal. So it's that great contrast. We got the toughest gardening conditions, but as a reward, we have the most extraordinary diversity of plants. So we're very, very lucky. So a big thank you. So we're just about to wrap up. If there's any last questions, and if you have the opportunity to do the evaluation, if you haven't done it, please do. That's amazing for us, because this has been funded by the City of South Perth, and big shout out to them, particularly Yulia, the amazing sustainability environmental officer who works tirelessly to make sure you have these high quality events that are free for you, and you're getting the most incredible advice. Hopefully you can recognize that. And so we want you to come to these events into the future. And if you don't use it, you lose it. So please, if you've enjoyed these events as well, it never hurts to drop a line to the City of South Perth saying thank you. No council gets fan mail. So when they do get a letter going, wow, they go, my goodness, let's do more of that. So our next event's coming up. We have the 4th of May. May the 4th be with you. And that's the, for all you Star Wars fans, 6 till 9. And that's water-wise and fertilizer-wise gardening. So it's a really perfect time. We'll really build on everything to do with turning sand into soil, dealing with water repellency, getting those plants to grow, some of those extraordinary plants, and how we can protect our beautiful rivers and waterways by not polluting them inadvertently by fertilizing or over-fertilizing. And then Tuesday, the 7th of June, that's our final in this series, 6 till 9 again, all online, is sustainability in the suburbs. So we'll have someone talking, an amazing permaculturalist, talking about how we can grow veggies, chooks, bees in the landscape. We'll have an amazing apiarist, Vince, the mad Croatian, talking about bees and how we can keep them in our landscapes, and all those other sustainability aspects, and how we can grow beautiful, nutrient-dense, organically derived food. So 2 amazing events to come up with. And as we said, City of South Perth has a range of tree planting events. So we talked about getting biodiversity, not just in our garden, but out into the areas of South Perth. So please get involved. And one of the great things to do with your kids, isn't it, to get them out tree planting?
Absolutely.
Even the crazed kids that seem to be completely off their chops, you get them out into nature and very quickly they calm down, don't they? It's just one of the great miracles for this ADHD phenomenon that we have. Get kids out into nature, get them out into nature. Final thing I was going to say, I spent some time with a neurologist he mapped my brain. They put these sensors on, proving that blokes do have brains. But the other thing, he mapped my son's brain, who's got autism, and we were looking at the map, which shows all the brain waves and areas of the brain that aren't functioning as well. And he said, oh, there's a band in the middle of his brain that's quite sticky. I said, what does that mean? And he said, well, it's where kids can get OCD, they can get depressed, anxious, their brain just almost gets like a tight muscle. And he said you can do brain training to loosen it, but the best thing is to get kids out into wild nature because the brain has to start thinking about football, scrambling. You've got the fractal patterns. So that's what helps to soothe and calm kids.
Yeah.
So instead of an artificial lawn square out the back, you can have a cornucopia and then, of course, all those other places and spaces.
Yes. So yes, Bamford Consulting Ecologists. If you Google Bamford Consulting Ecologists, there's a website and you can email us through there. Oh, someone said we should do workshops in schools. Well, we do sometimes do workshops in schools. So yes, absolutely. We'd love to do that. Yeah, no, look, I'd love to hear from you, and we should put some of these other bits of information on.
Yeah,
fantastic.
It's very true. And doing workshops in schools, funding is always the issue for us.
It is.
We still live in a world that, you know, environmental education is still seen as the poor cousin.
Yeah, it is.
It's going to change.
Absolutely. Yes, please talk to your politicians about environmental education in schools, because it is vital and it is very hard to fund. So yeah, no, look, absolutely, it's so important. And I think kids just lap it up. They really do. And you can teach everything through environment. You can teach maths, you can teach English, all those things through a lens of you know, the real world, which makes so much sense.
So so Bamford, for those, that's BAMFORD, very easy, Bamford Consulting, so people can find you guys. And of course, we're linked to you guys, I think, through the Forever Project, so it allows people to know what we're doing. There we are, and keep an eye on what we're doing with social media, and it just gives you a great opportunity. There's lots of events coming up. We're doing a pop-up workshop this Saturday. We're in Stirling at Karrinyup Shopping Centre, where we've put in this beautiful biodiverse garden so people can come and learn about how to set up their own gardens. So all of that's at the Forever Project website. And so thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. It's been such a privilege to have these extraordinary people sharing their skills and knowledge, and I hope it's going to make you creative in your own garden. So have a great night, and we look forward to seeing you bring your gardens alive with biodiversity. See you at the next event.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.